can you please call the roll?
Ms. Perron-Lambros,
Here.
Ms. Niedergang,
Here.
Mr. Cohen.
You're still muted,
I
David.
see you.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay. Ms. Fraga,
Here.
Mr. Williamson,
Here.
Ms. Sachs,
Here.
Mayor Lampert.
Here. So I'd like to welcome you all to this special meeting, kicking off the municipality's process of developing design guidelines for the Franklin Avenue affordable housing site. The Franklin Avenue development is one of the signature components of Princeton's current round of affordable housing construction. Its location borders two important neighborhoods, Harris Road and Witherspoon Jackson, and it is easy walking distance to the Central Business District, Princeton University, Community Park School, the middle and high schools, the municipal complex, and so many other important locations in town. It's actually located very close to the exact physical center of the municipality, and it also holds a special place in the history of Princeton's affordable housing program because Franklin and Maple Terrace, two of the three properties that make up this site, were built in the late 1930s and were the original affordable housing in Princeton. This project is also special in that the municipality is a partner in the design since the project is being built in part on municipal property. The purpose of this morning's forum is to give the governing body and our municipal planner the opportunity to listen and hear ideas from the community. We know there are many residents who've already started thinking about the potential for this site, both design professionals associated with Princeton Future and members of the public, including neighbors of the site and others who are especially interested in our affordable housing program. And I know there are also people who fit under all of those categories, which is great. We put out a call for presentations a couple weeks ago, and those presenting today are the people who contacted us with their interest in presenting at today's meeting. That's for the formal presentations. Over the coming months, members of the Princeton Council's Affordable Housing Subcommittee, which includes Council President David Cohen and Councilwomen Mia Sachs and Michelle Perron-Lambros, will be working to flesh out a consensus set of design guidelines with the planning staff, representatives from the Princeton Housing Authority, community investment strategies, and members of the public who volunteered to serve on a task force set up for this purpose. I want to thank everybody who have submitted their applications. The task force will be officially appointed at the next meeting of the Princeton Council, which is going to be on Monday, October 12th. Before we get started, I wanted to walk through the structure of this morning's meeting. So after I finish talking, I'm going to ask Michael OBrien, our municipal planner, for some comments. And then we're going to hear from our partners in developing the site, Princeton Housing Authority and Community Investment Strategies. Next, we will hear presentations from design professionals in the community who have submitted their ideas ahead of time and who have invested many volunteer hours to help envision a range of possible approaches to achieving the community's goals for the property under the terms of the municipality's Fair Share Plan. And after each presentation, we'll have a couple minutes for members of the council and members of the public to ask some questions. I want to keep the presentations moving, so we're only going to have time after each presentation for probably a couple questions. And then we're going to have a big block of time after we hear all the presentations for public comment. And that will be a time when anyone can share the reactions to the presentations. And this feedback, both negative and positive, is going to be enormously helpful to the task force as they work to develop consensus design guidelines. We're asking when you make a comment to try to make your comments as concrete and specific as possible. For example, these are only just examples, like I liked the massing shown in so-and-so's presentation, or I don't like allowing a Franklin Avenue entry to the commercial space fronting Witherspoon Street, or I think some parking should be reserved on Franklin Avenue. So the more specific your suggestions, the more likely they will be able to be incorporated into the design guidelines for the project. Okay, so with that, I want to thank everybody who's on the call this morning for joining on this beautiful Saturday morning, and to ask our planner, Michael Laplace, for any comments at this point.
Did everyone hear that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was not the end of the meeting. I think we're still going. We're just getting started.
I thought somebody was trying to tell me something, but okay. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. I think you did a wonderful job of setting the stage for what we want to accomplish today. I want to thank the council, the mayor and council, all our partners, and definitely the design professionals who put so much of their own personal time and effort into what I think is going to be a terrific session. I just wanted to make a few points. I don't want to hold things up this morning, but this is obviously a critical site in the heart of our community. And we have a wonderful opportunity starting today to begin the planning process by talking design. And I think that's always important. So this is going to be a wonderful design discussion, and it will set the stage for our whole planning process. I'm going to basically today, my role is to listen and take notes and try to understand what's important to the community in terms of how to shape this site. Other thing I wanted to note is that this central location in Princeton gives us a wonderful opportunity to weave these existing neighborhoods in the vicinity together, and also create a new neighborhood and bring in new neighbors to Princeton. So that's a really wonderful opportunity. So I would just challenge everyone to keep an open mind to everything we see and hear today, and let's really try to be as creative as possible. And I'm looking forward to the presentations.
Great, thanks, Michael. And now I wanted to introduce our partners on this project, and I'll introduce you as a group, and then you can make any comments you'd like before we get to the presentation. So Leighton Newland, who's the chair of the Princeton Housing Authority Board, Joseph Hobart Weiss, who is a member of the Princeton Housing Authority Board, and also Chris Folio from CIS. And I think if you guys can, I think we can bring you on so we can see you. And then if you unmute yourself. So Mark, could you, can you help make sure that we can see Chris Folio, Joseph Hobart Weiss, and Leighton Newland?
All right, just give me a minute. Give me a minute.
And I think you guys can go ahead and start while we work on getting your cameras working, but it looks like you're unmuted, so you could go ahead. Oh, there we go. Hi, Joseph.
Good morning.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, all. I would just like to read a quick statement on behalf of the Princeton Housing Authority. The Princeton Housing Authority, in partnership with Community Investment Strategies and the municipality of Princeton, has entered into an urban development agreement that will transform the Princeton Housing Authority's Maple Franklin site, 20 housing units built in the late 1930s and located on an underdeveloped and underutilized parcel of land in central Princeton, along with the parking lot vacated by the hospital, into a blended, mixed income, diversified, eco-friendly, and sustainable community. We are firm in our belief that the optimum and most equitable way to provide affordable housing is through a mixed income development. This approach provides for greater and more diverse human synergy and improved quality of life and living for the residents who will call it home, financial infusion for a more sustainable project, and for transference of a peaceful cohabitation with their neighbors and neighborhood. The municipal meeting today is for the purpose of reviewing and listening to design ideas for the project. The special meeting today is to allow architectural design experts in the field to share their vision of what could be accomplished on the site, perhaps even giving us a general sense of how it might feel to walk by or through what will become of what is there now, an empty and desolate parking lot. Today's discussion is not about strategic positioning or maneuvers. Today's discussion is not about circumventing the process, giving or amplifying voice to those who have already demonstrated their disagreement and opposition to the scope and direction of the project before ever allowing the process to unfold or to view and consider the socioeconomic benefits of the project or the design ideas which will be shared here today. Finally, today is a day of visioning, a look at smart growth, its careful application, and what the future could be for individuals and families that will become our neighbors and call Princeton home. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks, Leighton. I guess I'm up next. Good morning. My name's Joseph Weiss. I'm a commissioner on the Princeton Public Housing Authority. I want to thank Mayor, Council, and members of the community for participating in this design session. We're really excited about this project. I just want to briefly present a few slides, just kind of setting the background for the Princeton Housing Authority. I think, you know, we've been in town since 1938, but a lot of people don't even really know who we are or what we do. So if I may share my screen at the moment, and I have a very brief presentation. Okay, can everyone see the screen now?
Yes.
So the Princeton Housing Authority, as the mayor mentioned, was established in 1938 on this very site that's under consideration with the Maple Terrace housing. We are a governmental public corporation. We're regulated by Housing and Urban Development, and we rely on them for a lot of our funding. We're also regulated by the state of New Jersey under DCA. We own and manage 236 low-income housing rentals for families and seniors. Our mission is to provide safe and decent affordable housing to low-income families and individuals. And I will point out that most of our residents are at the lower end of the low-income spectrum. We want to also promote self-sufficiency among our residents and provide social services to help them improve their lives and give them economic stability. So it's not just about housing for us. These are some of our sites. We have, as I mentioned, 236 units on 5 sites. These are the Hagman homes on Clay Street. There's 50 units there. Reading Circle, we have, that's 2 components there. There's family units, and then there are senior units for a total of 100 units there. Lloyd Terrace, also known as Spruce Circle, 50 apartments there. And those are for senior and disabled residents. Karen Court, these are 16 apartments. These are our newest units in our inventory. And then finally, Maple Terrace on the corner of Witherspoon and Franklin Terrace. And then lastly, Franklin Terrace. And these last 2 are the developments that are under consideration for this project. I think you can see that, you know, all of our housing stock it's in pretty good shape, but it really is starting to age out, especially Maple and Franklin Terrace, which were built in 1938 and really need to be replaced. In addition, I think we all agree, and we actually know that the town has to provide more affordable housing in Princeton. So we propose to the town that we do a mixed income development on this site because we believe that doing mixed income is a superior way to deliver low-income housing. It's more socially beneficial. There's better financing options available for mixed income, and the increased income potential that mixed income offers facilitates the ability to spend a little bit more on the development to get a higher quality development. The development benefits to PHA and Princeton is that this project will generate income that will strengthen PHA. And that should be important to all of us in the Princeton community, because PHA for close to 100 years now, well, about 80 years, has provided a very important social service to this town. We are a homegrown agency. We are very much a part of this community. We are not a remote developer coming in looking to cash in on the value of Princeton. We are local, and we want to help build this community and help improve this community, not just now, but now and forever. We also believe this is an ideal site to do a mixed income project. I think everyone will agree it's currently underutilized. It has an ideal location, and it's a location that's, is really kind of almost a textbook example of what smart growth can be and what sustainable development can be. And those are two values that I think we all share. So thank you very much. And I really look forward to seeing the presentations from the design community. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Chris Folio. Actually, just if you're able to stop sharing your screen. Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
I did.
you.
Yeah. Chris, you're muted.
There should be a button there on the bottom left.
Got it.
There you go.
Yep, we're good. Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you. Thrilled to be part of this process, and thought it was important that people actually know who the development partner is. I'm going to take just a few minutes so there's some context to who I am and what my firm does. First off, I am a resident of Princeton. I had been the former executive director of the New Jersey and Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, the agency that really funds most of the rental affordable projects in the state. I also was the chair of the Council on Affordable Housing. I'm a housing economist and urban planner, as well as a developer. So I think my perspective on development is a bit unique. And I think when naming my firm is really going to give you the feel of what my company mission is. We really start with communities and investment. And the idea is, how can you utilize the development of affordable housing to not only create opportunities for individuals to have affordable housing, but how do you enhance a neighborhood? How do you blend that into the fabric of the community? And how do you create opportunities at the end that allow these families to thrive? And that is really what drives my company. We've been in business for over 30 years. I have been in the affordable housing space for over 35 years. I know you can do the math, and unfortunately you'll figure out my age, but here we go. We have over 3,400 units in New Jersey that are all meeting affordable housing requirements for towns, or were done in concert with towns through redevelopment. We have done some market rate projects. They're not listed here, but we really feel that the conversation this morning is going to the next level of policy. I'm a policy advisor for the state of New Jersey in housing, and the HMFA has been clear that, and HUD has been clear that we should all be looking at mixed income as a better way to support a diverse, economically diverse communities. My firm is made up of integration of smaller companies. We're a fully integrated company through woman-owned construction. We manage all of the units at CIS Management. We're located in Lawrenceville, so I think it takes about 15 minutes to get to the Franklin site. And we also are committed to health and housing. We've recently signed agreements with a company called Delos, which is a wellness company, which was very involved in setting up the Well Building Institute, and we are part of that, as well as healthcare and behavioral health within our properties. So we've used every program imaginable to build affordable housing. We believe that this should not just be on the dime of the host community. So we are experts in tax credits, tax exempt bonds, and all of the other soft dollars that hopefully we would be able to identify and help secure for this property. Obviously, development and design is the agenda for this morning. I'm just sharing a little bit of what our properties look like. This happens to be a senior property in Monmouth County, but all of our communities, we do a model unit. That's a model in the left-hand corner. There's, facilities, gyms, and I think I put the landscaping up. I just got lucky that it was seasonal and appropriate. But a property that if you were driving by looks like any other property.
Chris,
in town.
if you're sharing your screen, we can't see anything.
Sharing your screen this whole time because we haven't seen anything.
I was sharing the screen. Let's try it again. Mark, can you allow me to share the screen?
You should be able to share your screen. Everyone can share their screen. Try it again.
There's a group.
There you are.
Okay.
That's working.
Okay, so I apologize. So just to kind of give you some graphics, this is how our company is structured as an integrated company. And this is the location of all of our properties, 3,400 units. I think those are really the key. And then I was in development and design, which is showing a recent senior building and articulating that what we really are driven by is address and presence. And I think today is really about that. And I'd like people, as they're participating, just to think about a child who lives at an address. And if you can remember back to maybe that first grade, where the first thing you do is you write your address down, where do I live? It's so important that that address does not become a label, does not translate into someone thinking less of a person. And so I think today, with the opportunity to think broader, think of the impacts beyond the density or materials, but what happens to an individual that lives there and how do they assimilate into our community? And I think that's really a big question for this property. As you know, and it's been talked about, this will require a variety of financing, mostly driven by a tax credit application. In this particular instance, we're talking about maybe raising between $15 and $20 million of grant funding through that process. These are the individuals that have participated in my projects over the years. It represents over $800 million of investment. And so we believe that we will be able to tap into some really strong investors that would be interested in partnering with the town on this project. We've been a 3-time winner of a Management Company of the Year by the New Jersey Apartment Association. And as we go through this process, I think it's important that management will make or break this. Design will make it look pretty. Management will make it sustainable. As I mentioned, we're in the health and housing business. I mentioned Delos, which is the well initiative that we're doing in all of our buildings. And we've also just recently signed an agreement with Rutgers Graduate School of Social Work, where we have practicums for graduate students that go through all of our properties. We're currently using this program with the Housing Authority in their existing inventory. We are an MBE WBE qualified firm, And we're right down in Lawrenceville. So thank you for your time this morning.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Before, one last thing before we get to the presentations, I wanted to acknowledge that we have received a petition from the Franklin neighbors, or from, you know, the Franklin neighbors who signed this petition, asking for there to be consideration of reducing the number of market rate units in the development. And I do want to publicly acknowledge receipt of that petition, and it is part of the agenda packet. Okay, now we're going to get to the meat of the meeting, and I wanted to invite Tony Nellison to unmute himself, and to you can show your face, and if you'd like to share your screen, that would be great. Just in some of the back and forth and having the meeting flow. Tony's actually going to go twice, so we're going to hear a short presentation from him up top, and then we'll hear again a short presentation at the end.
Okay, can you guys see this?
Yep, looks good.
Yes.
Okay, this is really a presentation of a whole series of ideas that were generated over a 6-month period of time. Now, it really started in February when Princeton Future had this extraordinary public meeting at the library, and so many people showed up. And they were designed, you know, they was organized kind of into teams and tables. And we got so much extraordinarily input. I mean, and I had seen the ad in the paper, and I thought, boy, wouldn't this be a fun way to truly get involved with what's going on here? And to my unbelievable surprise, all these people showed up. And not only did they show up, but there were some really remarkable comments that were made as part of that meeting. Now, some of you may not know that, but there was a book that was done by Princeton Future that recorded every word that was said at that meeting, and was called Listening to Each Other. Now, after that meeting was over, you know, it was so exciting, a lot of adrenaline, that a whole bunch of people who stayed after that meeting said, wouldn't it be fantastically fun to be able to see this whole process evolve? And let's take a first step and see if we can come up with a bunch of alternatives for the site based on what the folks have told us. Now, that's kind of what happened. And literally, the meetings have lasted for about 6 months, with a whole bunch of us meeting every a couple of weeks, kicking out ideas, arguing with each other, discussing the things. And you know, it's very rare that you get 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 design folks to sit down and have a charrette together and come up with a fantastic set of alternatives. So let's start really quite simply on this thing. And my stuff, I'm an urban designer. You're going to see fantastic renderings by architects and architects firm in this town. But let me just start by saying the people who participated in this pro bono, and there's so many other folks who have supported it over a particular period of time, but these are people who really love and care for this town, and then really believe in this issue of inclusion, and also are really committed to this idea of equity and of sustainability. So we could just use those as major words. So what we've got here is 3 sites, sites 1, 2, and 3, and site 2 and 3 are the Maple and the Terrace. But you can see the whole site is approximately a little over 3 acres of land, which is a remarkable piece of land, of which the town owns 2 of these pieces, or about 78% of the site. Here's an aerial view of the site, not all the way to Witherspoon Street, but you see site 1, 2, and 3. The largest site, of course, is site 1 on Franklin Avenue, which is the old parking lot. And directly across from that, there are some single-family houses. And across from site 2, there are some of the Avalon townhouses, and across from site 3, there are townhouses and the little park on the corner. Now, we got from the town of the engineering maps that said, and those of you who have walked by the site, I mean, when I first saw the site, I just bicycled over there to look at it, and And you'll know that the level of the actual flat parts of the site are raised above the sidewalk grade, sometimes 2, 3, 4 feet, and it goes up towards the cemetery. But so we have a reasonable topo map, and then all of the existing buildings that were there at the time are on this particular map, and you'll see several fantastic three-dimensional drawings of this. Now, there are really some really important environmental and issues on the site itself. One is that the site itself is 957 feet long, a fifth of a mile. This is a long site, big frontage onto Franklin Avenue. Now, the other one is that we've got the sun angle. Now, you're going to hear a lot about wanting to make this thing sustainable, and part of that's going to be solar access, and that's going to be talked about a lot, about how in the world we make this stuff as close to net zero as possible. And then, of course, there are the views, and we have great neighbors on the opposite side. We have great neighbors everywhere, but these are the cemetery. So the views over this, probably the biggest single green space in the center of Princeton, is a view which is extraordinary, and it will, of course, will always be there. So you got the sun, the views, and then there was some thought at some point, and this is just exploratory thought, to maybe perhaps make a connection to that park and that cemetery. Right at the point at which, if you guys know, is where they store all the extra ground from the graves that are dug, and there's a potential connection there. But again, these are all just general ideas. Now, existing context, as you all know, these are the existing context of the parking lot when there were still cars parked on it, and you can see that slight change above grade, a narrow sidewalk, and a fairly narrow parkway with parallel parking on the side. Now, each of these projects has an access off of Franklin Avenue, and you can see them here, kind of driveways or access ways to the thing itself. And then, of course, there's the issues of adjacency. And if you see carefully here, you can see Jefferson, and Jefferson lined with magnificent large single-family houses, and those which actually front the site on one side actually have an alleyway, a kind of a classic traditional development form where you have the garages in the back and the houses in the front. And there is a fence that exists between the parking lot and the back of the Jefferson projects, that Jefferson housing. Now, there's an alley, most of you know, and then there are the garages, and then there is a wooden fence that exists. So this edge is really extremely important, and there's been a lot of considerations on this, from parks to setbacks to a lot of discussion of what happens on this particular edge. And there was a tremendous amount of discussion, and you'll see this in Josh Simler's presentation later on, about how to begin to respect the height and the adjacency and the proportions of the street. I mean, Franklin Avenue will have a possibility to become an absolutely magnificent mixed-use street. Of that, there's no doubt, enclosed on both sides and absolute correct proportions. So there was a lot of discussion on that, which you'll begin to see. What are the setbacks? What's a semi-public edge? What should we do about landscaping, et cetera, et cetera? And you'll see all of that stuff. Now, I'm going to show you really my quick schemes. I'm an urban designer. I'm trained as an architect, but I'm an urban designer. And before the February 29th meeting, I saw this idea of the 80 units, but on the parking lot only. And I thought to myself, gee, what could this look like? And that's what really kind of started and what propelled me to actually go to the first meeting. So what's my inspiration? Well, I did the plan and the design for the Robbinsville Town Center. I did the visioning process with the town. I created the zoning code and was the early planner on this town. And I'm really, extraordinarily pleased with what happened there and how it got built and how my design vocabulary actually became reality. And these are really kind of classic street configuration. And every architect that I know goes through these inspirations. What inspires you to think about this site in some way or another? So let me give you the first little doodle idea that I had. And you're going to see mine are all pencil sketches. They're not as sophisticated as about what you're about to see. So this was 80 units, 40 apartments a floor, double loaded. main corridor, rear gardens, parking on site in the back of the building. And the building looked like this. It's a standard kind of a single configuration with a court in the front and the front on. And remember, this is only on Franklin Street, on Franklin Avenue. So this is the first doodle, you know, so there's a sidewalk and it's the height of the parking lot, and there's a yard in the front, and there's big windows, and there's some 80 units, 2 stories, pitched roof, basement parking, French balconies, large tall windows, 1 main articulated entrance, and a 20-foot setback to the sidewalk. But the second scheme was one that came immediately after the presentation on the 29th. And this was Chris, and she said it earlier today, you know, how in the world do you actually create an elegant townhouse scheme, but you give everybody an address rather than just kind of 1 main entrance? And so the inspiration here actually was stoops and stairs and what was called the pride of place and individual identity. And I will, you know, I will attest this to Chris, but when we look at really kind of classic streetscapes worldwide, there's always this question of the semi-public edge, the stoops and stairs, the little garden in the front. But you know, that's just not here. It's just not other places. It's also here, and you can see it. Just a simple walk around Princeton just shows you this, and it's absolutely, it's classic. People love it, and it's actually glorious. And you can see it on the stuff on Paul Robeson Place and other places on Mercer Street, and you can see it directly across the street. Although, in my opinion, not very well designed. You know, they only did it partially and should have actually completed it. But nonetheless, this is the inspiration for it. So this is kind of what it would look like. You know, this is just a quick schematic section. Parking in the basement, half level underground, so it's relatively inexpensive. Double loaded corridors, except the ground floor would be from the beginning to the end. It would be from the front to the back. So all of the ground floor units would have stoops and stairs. They'd have a unit that goes all the way through, and the top 2 floors would be the standard double loaded corridor. And so that's, you know, certainly is one idea. Now, this is the way it would kind of look, that you would start out perhaps on the parking lot first. And there was a tremendous amount of discussion saying those folks who live in Maple and the existing site on site 1 and 2 should be the first priority to be relocated. And we should build a piece of it first, to then allow them to be able to be moved into this particular project and into this first phase of the plan. And you can see here, there's a series of townhouses with 14 2 or 3 bedroom units at the ground level, each with their stoops and stairs. And then it just would continue later on to the next part of the site, and then to the third part of the site, which is the frontage on Witherspoon Street and in the corner. So that
Tony, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure we have time for all the presentations.
Got it.
So
I will speed through this. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so there were plans developed for it, for each one of these things. So, you know, these are the variations on the set. And the last one, these are just the last scheme. This was living in a continuous garden. It's another variation on the theme, doing windows and doors, but actually trying to break the site down into a very specific organic set of building configurations with gardens in the front and the back. So the whole place would be like living in a garden. Each of these would have a house. There's a plan, there's a site plan, there's the parking, and then the actual evolution of this would be, it goes from 2 stories to 4 stories, back to 2 stories. And then this is the early sketch of what this would start to look like with its little green roofs. And then one more sketch people had suggested to actually animate the front yards of these so that this would really become a continuous green space of some form or another. Okay, that, and then there's the corner. As we know, this is really thought of putting a kind of a retail use on the corner, if you will, only on the corner, and then some thoughts about how we could reconfigure Franklin Avenue to become something else. So let's present it first of these 3 schemes. I will stop sharing my screen now, and then we'll move on to the next one.
okay, great. Thank you very much. Just because we got a little bit behind time, I'm going to move on to the next presentation. And if we can get back on time, we'll do the Q&A after each presentation. But at this point, if you have specific comments, let's wait and do those as part of the public comment, because I want to make sure we leave a decent block for that. So next is Heidi Fichtenbaum. So Heidi, it looks like you're unmuted, and then hopefully we can see your, oh, I see your face. Too.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi,
And then
everybody.
share your screen.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. This. Let's see. Yes, share screen. Tell me when it's working. I'm clicking the button, but nothing's happening. Share. Okay. Yes.
Now it's
There you go.
working.
Yay. Okay. I get to the beginning. Okay. So thanks for allowing me to participate in this conversation about the Franklin Affordable Housing. And my presentation is slightly different than the other architects. Mine really focuses on sustainability. And I want to talk to you today about Passive House. You know, first of all, what it is, why we need it, and how we could get there. And the purpose of this presentation is to include Passive House certification in the RFP. So what is Passive House? It's intelligent design. This is the sort of the history of building science, right? In the 19th century, we heated our homes with fireplaces. In the 20th century, we decided we could engineer our way to comfort. But now here we are in the 21st century, and what we're realizing is that we actually need to pay attention to the environment because of climate change. And we need to build better buildings that are more comfortable, that are healthier, that address climate change and reduce our reliance on mechanical systems. Princeton adopted the climate action plan that was put together by Sustainable Princeton. And what we realized was that our greenhouse gas inventory was nearly 65% due to buildings. So buildings are the problem, buildings are also the solution. And also, in addition to that, recently the municipality adopted a green building environmental sustainability element to its master plan, which says that climate change considerations need to be central to land use planning and decision making. Okay, so why Passive House? You know, the energy affordability is a very, very big issue for the why of Passive House, why we should choose this. As you can see, when you're at the lower end of the income scale, you know, what you spend of your income on energy is really significant. And Passive House is among a group of green building standards to choose from. You may have heard of LEED or Energy Star Homes or Net Zero Ready, which is a DOE program. But of all these programs, Passive House is clearly the winner when it comes to saving energy and creating healthy and comfortable homes. And that's really, really important as we are trying to move forward and address the issue of climate change, reduce our reliance on carbon, fossil fuels, reduce our carbon output. So in summary, Passive House is high performance, and these are sort of the 5 things that you do to get a passive house, right? The optimization of solar orientation, high levels of insulation, tight construction, balanced ventilation, high performance windows. And this results in homes that are durable, that are healthy, and that are comfortable to live in. And these are issues that have come up in our conversations with people who live in the neighborhood and who live in the current Franklin affordable housing development. And one of the things that really sets Passive House apart is air tightness. It makes a big difference. These are photos that are really illustrative, taken in Princeton just this year. The one on the left shows, someone taking sort of the built to code Tyvek building wrap. It's not well sealed. It's not really doing the job. It's that, previous century way of thinking. And then the one on the right is using zip sheathing, and it's taped. And I think that these two photographs really illustrate what the difference is and why we're advocating for passive house and the problems that we face. And yet the technologies and the products are there, and they are actually in use. So we don't actually need to invent anything to move in this direction. The passive house benefits are really, really clear. This is a project that a group of us from Princeton went and visited. It's affordable housing built in Westville, New Jersey. And so besides the reduced energy costs and the reduction in carbon emissions, the increase in comfort and health, these projects also provide resiliency and maybe very important in these days and in this time, they provide environmental justice, because most power plants are located in communities of color and places where people are of lower income. And we know that the air quality in those places is poor and the levels of asthma are higher. And so when we choose in Princeton and other places not to build to this higher level of energy efficiency, we require more energy, and we burden those communities where those power plants are located. So now let's talk about, what does this all cost and how do we get there? So as part of building a building, there are land costs, soft costs, hard costs, the hard costs being sort of the bricks and mortar. And the bricks and mortar are what we really want to focus on today, because that's where some of these differences really come in. Myself and several others in Princeton have attended 2 years, the last 2 years, a conference called New Gravity, and it really focuses on passive house. In the first year, we saw a presentation by Tim McDonald of Onion Flats. And it was, what I'm showing on the screen is data from 2015 from the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency of the affordable housing that was built to passive house and non-passive house standards. And they actually collected data over a 3-year period. And what it showed was there was somewhere between a 0 and 2.5% increase in hard costs to do passive house. The first year, the passive house was up the 2%. The next year, it was actually down 2%. And then this past year, we attended the conference again and heard a presentation by Charlie Adams of Penrose Development on their Meridian Commons project, which is in Connecticut. And they were saying 7 to 9% increase. So if there is, say, between a 0 and 10% increase, just in round numbers, to do this, what does that really mean? Looking at number of units and the square footage and the cost per square foot. And, you heard Chris say, oh, this is between 15 and 20 million. And that was the conclusion that I also drew, just crunching the numbers. So if there's a 5% cost premium, we're talking about just under $1 million. And if it's a 10% cost premium, just under $2 million. And the incremental soft cost, by the way, we calculated that. We talked to people who've done these projects. We added up, and it's less than 0.5%. So how do we manage this cost? How do we drive it down to the lower end, that 0 to 2.5% rate? Well, over and over again, we heard that it was an experienced and motivated team that would get us there. And what would also get us there is understanding that this is a better investment. It's a lower risk investment, and that makes banks willing to invest. And in fact, there are basis points that are now being offered for buildings that are high performance, you know, up to 30 basis points, and green bonds and other financing mechanisms that we need to investigate and tap into for this development. And part of that is proving that it's really saving money. And here you can see a standard code house and the energy savings that you might expect on an annual basis with a passive house. That's real money, and that adds up over a number of years. And that makes investors interested in your project. Here was another presentation, and I think this was really illustrative of why building a building that is durable, that is really based on the science of building, the current science of building, is so important. Here's a project, Village Square, that was presented by Todd Rothstein of Vista Housing. Just like CIS, they build and manage affordable housing. This project, unfortunately, was built in 1995, really recently. And they started experiencing problems with it not too many years after. And in 2016, they realized they needed to replace the windows in this building. But when they pulled the windows out, what they found was mold and rot. And what turned out, what started as a window replacement for maybe $32,000 turned into a whole exterior replacement to the tune of just under $300,000. That's not to mention the disruption to the residents who lived there, and doesn't even include probably the framing repairs that also needed to be done. And these were the numbers that Todd gave me.
Heidi, this is another great presentation, but I'm asking if you can try to wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So there are incentives through New Jersey Clean Energy as well, to the tune of $1,500. And so how do we get there if this is what we're facing? So here's a back of the napkin. It's just the beginning of a conversation of how we could get there. These are typical, low-income tax credits, private mortgage, Federal Home Loan of New York, who provides loans to low-income housings, and our own Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So this is my final slide, and I just want to say, if we are serious about affordable housing and building durable, comfortable, and sustainable homes, we need to include passive house and start down that road to a carbon-free future. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And it looks like there's one person who has their hand up, Connie Witter. Connie, did you have a question or comment on Heidi's presentation in particular?
I think her hand has been up since the very beginning of the.
Okay. Well, Connie, if you wanted to unmute yourself, if you had it looks like you're able to speak now if you'd like. But if not, I think we'll wait till the end. I'll give you another beat here. Okay. Yep. I think there you go. Can you speak, Connie? Nope. All right, looks like Harold Heft has his hand up. Can we give Harold a chance to ask a question to Heidi?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would have raised earlier. I saw that the chat was off. Thank you for acknowledging the petition from many of those in the surrounding neighborhood. I live on Jefferson Road and back directly onto the property. Why wasn't the petition read that was submitted? I know that it was included in the agenda. PHA, CIS, and the town were allowed to offer their rationale for the 160 unit mixed income development. The Jefferson petitioners offered a different set of concerns from those who were permitted to speak based on different contingencies. Their concerns regarding density and the attendant complications should be part of the equation that's being taken into account. None of the petitioners' concerns object to the development of the lot, just the scope of it. So out of fairness, please read the petition to those who are attending this meeting to give it the same time and visibility as the other presenters at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I can do that at the top of the general public comment. But if there's no other direct questions for Heidi, then yeah, David?
I just wanted to respond to Harold's question. We did consider reading it, but it's our practice at council meetings that you either get to make a comment in writing or you get to make comments verbally. And we were concerned that if we read the petition out loud, none of the 122 signers would be entitled to make comments during the public comment section at the end of the meeting. So that's the quick answer.
Okay. Okay, thanks Heidi for that presentation. And next is Marina Rubina, who, Marina, if you can, I see you there. Hopefully you can unmute yourself and show us your face and share your screen.
Hello. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep, looks good.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for having me, and glad to be following the presentation from Heidi telling us about the Passive House Initiative and how green building is definitely part of our thinking. And as a neighbor, as a local architect, I'm hoping to discuss with and sort of start the thinking of how do we find the success of this project when we 20 years from now walk by the site. What is it that we see and how do we decide, was this a success? Did it work? So many people already showed the existing site, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. The only interesting thing that I would like to note is how the site is, of course, very long, but it also happens to be very narrow. Where the big parking lot is on one side, there's the development of one-story homes in the middle, and kind of a row of homes towards Witherspoon. So I jotted down kind of where we are. So when the hospital moved, Franklin Avenue was left one-sided and incomplete. And as people who have not been in Princeton for a long time, when they walk down Franklin, they're probably wondering what exactly happened. So we have an opportunity here to build a pedestrian-friendly, walkable neighborhood along Franklin on par with Jefferson Road. So that is attractive, exciting, and lively. And it could be as great as Jefferson is on Halloween. So for me, when I think about success, I think, would you or I be excited to go trick-or-treating on this new Franklin Avenue for Halloween? More walkable places to live in town means less dependence on cars and less traffic. If you work here, I truly hope that you could find a place to live here. So less commuting is more time for family and community. And as a mother of two small children, this is very important for me. I have the wonderful opportunity of living very close to this site, and my kids live walking distance to school. They could go to after-school activities by themselves. They could walk to their friends' homes. And what allows for me is allows time for me to have a career and a life rather than driving my kids around. And I want to have other people who want to have that opportunity to have that opportunity. And I truly hope as an architect that this development is beautiful, timeless, sustainable, and something that could be an example for other projects in New Jersey. Having said all that, how in the world are we going to pay for all of this? So I did a little bit of research and thought about how does this low-income housing tax credit funding project work? And it's a very complicated set of criteria, and you have to meet a lot of requirements. However, meeting all of the requirements is not enough. The way the selections are made is based on effectively the lowest price per bedroom, which I think from our standpoint could sound really terrible, but on the other hand, the agency that provides the funding, their goal is to provide as much funding as they possibly can with the money that they have. So it's not their responsibility to worry about exciting design. It's their responsibility to provide as much housing as they can per dollar. So I went and checked out some of the projects that received these low income tax credits. And I think that we start to see sort of patterns of what these projects looks like. And I'm sure these are people worked really hard on these projects, and people who live there are grateful to have housing. However, what you could see is that these are very efficient building blocks that are sitting effectively in the field of parking. So it's a compact box with a surface parking lot. And what I hope that we look at is some of the mixed income housing projects, where when projects start to have mixed income, there is more flexibility and more opportunity for design features. So you still get the funding, but it's also supplemented by the market rate housing. So interestingly enough, some of these photographs, and one of them is in Princeton, and some of the other ones were done by the same architects. So this is not that those people had bad architects and these people had good architects. It's just that the budgets on these things are so tight that you don't have a lot of flexibility. So this was me trying to think, so what happens if we were just to do 80-unit affordable housing project with low income tax credits and we don't subsidize this at all? So what would probably will happen is we're going to end up with one of those compact buildings, and we would keep the existing parking lot because it's already there. It's already paid for. It will be a little bit refurbished. But what this is, this would be, one of those buildings that I showed previously, because that's the most efficient way to do it. And it won't fit on the narrow lot closer to Witherspoon because it's just such a funny shape. So when I'm thinking, do I want to go trick-or-treating here? This is a preliminary view of what you would see. You would be having a sidewalk and trees, and then you would be walking by that same parking lot, and then you would have a building wall next to you with a little bit of landscaping, but that's really what we're going to get. And I am venturing to say that that's not the funnest place to go trick-or-treating. So what if we try to do something more interesting and exciting, which I think is, people started talking about it, that Franklin Avenue is sort of a link between the two densities, the two communities. And what if we can concentrate a more kind of higher density, for lack of a better word, more intense development on the Witherspoon side between Avalon and our main road, and then try to start building townhouses and duplexes and lower scale towards Jefferson. What I think that would do, what that would require is basically putting the parking underground and creating a lovely park and green space on top of it. We have some examples of this development. For example, the Dean Maddie University housing on the corner of Faculty Road and Harrison. People are probably familiar with that. It has townhomes and you have absolutely no idea, but there's a parking structure underneath. So that model of development, I think, would work wonderfully here. The only problem is, how are we going to pay for this? Because this, if we just apply with this for the low-income housing tax credits, we're probably not going to get it because these are not going to be the least expensive per bedroom that we could build. So therefore, then the town has to subsidize this. So here's what this would look like. Right? So if we're walking down Franklin towards Witherspoon, that we would have single family duplexes and townhomes on one side, and I'm proposing that you would have duplexes on the other side, and then it would transition to a 3-story building towards the end. And then there would be ways of getting into the site where you could have a park in the back. And here's looking the other way, a schematic view. And I'm a really big fan of passive house, and we would try to incorporate green roofs and sustainable features. And what's also really important for me is that we would enliven the street, that we would have interaction between the people who are living in those homes and the people who are walking down the street, because that's really what builds community, what builds connections. A lot of people I know, I try to get as much as possible having kitchens facing the street, that when you're at your sink washing dishes, loading the dishwasher, you could wave to your neighbors, and that's how we start to build connections and build community. So here are some possibly crazy ideas, but how do we pay for all of this? So could we get the same result without the extra cost? So one option is to build extra market rate units to offset the cost. The other one is some of the market rate duplexes could be for sale. So if we build those duplexes along Franklin, maybe some of them are market rate and could be sold to pay for the parking. Here's another one that I know that merchants who have employees in the downtown area have been asking to park on that surface parking lot because it's really convenient. So if we instituted a payment in lieu of parking program where people who have businesses in the downtown, when they're expanding and opening, where they're effectively constantly having to ask for a variance because they just can't possibly provide parking on their properties, and their variances are usually granted. What we could start doing, and this was recommended by our parking study, is have a payment in lieu of parking program where we would collect money for people who are not able to provide parking, put them in the fund, and then possibly the parking that would be underground at this property could be considered that project, and the money would go towards this project. And then those people who work in the downtown businesses could actually park here. Then here's yet another crazy idea. So the Princeton Housing Authority across the street has another project. They're a community with a Pinnell Learning Center, and they have educational functions in that building. And what if those two functions were combined, and some of that commercial space that we're proposing, we're thinking about on Witherspoon in the new development, could be accommodating those educational functions, after school programs, activities, and then possibly that frees up the former building where the Pinnell Learning Center currently is located to be another way of raising money. So what does that mean in terms of the site? So what this means is, you see, we could keep effectively the street facade. So this scheme right here, if you're walking down the street, the only difference with the other picture is that you're starting to see something back there, right, poking. Otherwise, in terms of you walking down the street, there's really no difference. And there's a little bit of something here. And you know what this actual option proposes? Actually, it says 160 plus unit, but it's actually 200. So you could fit 200 units by maintaining the same street relationship, the same interaction with the street, the same scale. But because we have that opportunity in the back, you could put additional units back there, and from the street walking down, you wouldn't even know it. So here, side by side, this is an 80 unit project, which is absolutely the most efficient. We're gonna get the low income tax credits, or we could build more, and we could allow the developer to have the flexibility to figure out how many of the additional units are needed. And I don't know, I'm not Chris, so I can't really say whether 160 is the right number, or is it 140, or is it 200? But if we provide the guidelines of what we would like to achieve and leave her with the flexibility of figuring out how many of these additional units are needed, then I think we could really have a successful project. So what I wanted to leave you guys with is this thought that in 20 years, I hope that we're all walking down the street and talking and waving to our neighbors who are living in these homes, and whether it's in the 3-story, 4-story building, or these duplexes and townhomes along the way. But what we've actually done, we're feeling, oh, well, this was a successful development, and we know all these people and they're part of our community.
Thanks, Marina. So I wanted to open it up for just a minute or two of questions. And these should be questions for Marina, specifically on her presentation. We'll have time at the end for more general comments. So I see Connie Witter has her hand up again. Maybe it came off. Okay, and then there's if there's a raise hand feature, if you're interested in making have a question specifically for Marina, if you want to raise your hand. Okay, I think we're going to save a lot of the discussion till the end because I think it'll flow easier. So if you do have a question for Marina and you're having trouble with the technology, just write it down and save that thought, and we'll get to you at the end of the presentations. Next up is Joel Schwartz. So Joel, if you can make yourself visible so we can see you, and unmute yourself and share your screen. There we go, we see you, that's good. And we see your screen too, so go ahead, thank you.
Good morning all, thank you so much for setting this up and allowing me to participate. My name is Joel Schwartz. I've lived in Princeton since 1980. I'm an architect, planner, and a developer. I've been doing that for more than 40 years. I've designed and or built and or managed several thousand housing units, including hundreds of affordable housing units in dozens of inclusionary projects. This type of project is basically what I've done professionally for the last 40 years. All the work I've done on this project is pro bono and will continue to be pro bono. I have no interest in any form of paid involvement with this project whatsoever. So previous speakers have identified the uniqueness of the site in the center of town and the fact that it has a great deal of walkability and open space. One of the things that's striking is the site is neither a town center site nor a purely residential site. It's actually exactly in between. And any successful design for this site has to recognize that it is literally an ecotone, two different planning communities overlapping each other. More so than most parts of Princeton, we all know that this neighborhood, particularly Jefferson and Moore, have a very unique architectural character. One of the things that's striking about this is while most of the homes are 2-story in height, there are also 1-story homes and there are some 3-story homes. The 1-story homes are not out of place, nor are the 3-story homes. And the moral of the story is that 1 story more or less really does not make much of a difference. Franklin Avenue has also been commented is a very unusual street. Useful metric is that along Franklin Avenue, there are barely 10 street trees and not a single front porch on almost 1,000 feet of frontage. Along the same amount of frontage on Jefferson, there are dozens of mature street trees and dozens of front porches of homes. The takeaway is that in the neighborhood surrounding the site, the things that make that neighborhood really desirable and attractive are 4 things. The street trees, the fact that the houses front the street, as you can see, in a very consistent way with certain characteristics. The front yards are extensively planted and there are pathways from the sidewalk to the front door. Here you see the concept plan I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes. There are it looks like 2 buildings. There are actually 3 buildings. There's a 3-story building closest to Witherspoon. There's a park in the middle, and then it's flanked on either side by 2 buildings that are 4 stories, but are seen from the street as only 3-story buildings. Here you see the site plan overall. As you can see, starting from left to right, starting from Witherspoon Street, you have an apartment building, and then a block of townhouses, and then an apartment building, then a park in the center, and then another apartment building. We'll be talking about the details of these design elements. The proposed design is based on the visual vocabulary of the 2 adjoining neighborhoods, the single family and the town center. And the design incorporates pieces from each. The most important takeaway is that the frontage I'm proposing along Franklin Avenue is primarily a 3-story streetscape And actually some part of it are only 2 stories. The project, to repeat, has 2-story, 3-story, and 4-story elements. But you may consider it a design trick, but an important part of this design is to present a 3-story street wall along Franklin Avenue. The 4-story elements are furthest from the street, and they're screened from the view of the street. Here you see a plan view that expresses the massing of the building. The darkest color are 2-story townhouses. The mid-range color is 3-story. And as you can see, the lightest color, which is 4-story, is furthest away from the street and is effectively screened from view by the 3-story element. Here you see this in cross section. This is a view looking down Franklin Avenue towards Witherspoon Street. On the right, you see a cross section through the Avalon townhouses. On the left, you see the 3-story element that I'm proposing, and behind it, the 4-story element, which is the apartment building. You can see from the sight line of pedestrians on either side of Franklin Avenue, it's physically impossible to see the 4-story building as you walk along the street. Here, once again, is a detail of how that works. The lighter color is the 4-story building, mid-range color are the 3 stories, and the buildings are arranged to be broken up into pieces that, as you can see from looking at the homes across the street along Franklin and Harris, the pieces in front of the building are exactly the same scale and mass as a 1-story home. And in between them, they have yards that are reminiscent of a single-family house. So the idea of this is that the pieces in front of the buildings are very much like a single-family home. They are close enough to the street to relate to it, but they're set back far enough to have front yards. All the buildings that I'm proposing are set back further than the Avalon townhouses, and they have setbacks that are similar to single-family homes, but not quite as large. Closer to Jefferson and Harris, there is a single-family massing and articulation to everything that's being proposed. Here you see a organization of the apartment building. If you look closely along Franklin Avenue, you see a series of walkways that lead towards the buildings and a larger walkway that leads towards a central lobby. In elevation, you see the pieces of the building. The 3-story buildings, the 3-story pieces are about the mass of a single-family home, but they actually contain apartments. And so if you lived in the apartment on the first floor where it says 42, you would have a front porch with direct access from the street. But the back of your apartment is connected to the apartment building, so you have a barrier-free route from inside the hallways and elevators of the apartment building. Here you see a continuous elevation starting on the left from Jefferson Road and the existing house at the corner of Jefferson and Franklin, and then the apartment building. And in this elevation, you can see the 4th story of the 4-story apartment building popping up behind, but you never have this view because you always see things in life in 3 dimensions. And the 3-story elements are what screens the 4th story from view. So starting from Jefferson, you see a single-family house. You see a space which actually contains a driveway which leads to parking underneath the building. You see the building with a series of 4 house-sized elements closer to the street with yards, green planted yards and courtways in the center. Then to the right of that, you see the park, which separates the building on the left from the building on the right. Here, once again, you see the cross section, which shows the key concept of this plan. The 3-story elements are only a story taller than the Avalon townhouses across the street. They're only a story taller than the 4 single-family homes along Franklin Avenue. And as you walk around town, I'm sure you've noticed that 1 story, more or less, really does not make anything seem out of place. Here you see an overall view of the project. This shows the conditions at the second residential floor. This shows a close-up of the elevation once again. Here you see a close-up again of the main apartment building with its 3-story element in front. Close-up of the other building. Once again, the relationship of the pieces. It's also worth looking at Franklin Avenue as an opportunity that we have. Franklin Avenue as a street is a marginally useful street because at 30 feet wide, it's really not wide enough to do anything besides have two-way travel. If Franklin were only 2 feet wider, it could support on-street parking on the project side of the street. There's enough land in the Franklin Avenue site to donate a couple of feet to the municipal right-of-way so that there could be on-street parallel parking along the frontage of this project. That's the most efficient way to create parking. And that on-street parking, which amounts to about 30 plus cars, plus 140 plus or so underground parking spaces beneath the building, provides all the parking that the project needs. If the street were widened, there are actually opportunities to use both sides of the street. It's logical to use the project side of the street for on-street parallel parking. There's a great opportunity on the Avalon side of the street. It could be a bike path, or it could be additional on-street parking. In addition, Franklin Avenue is almost unique in Princeton as being one of the least well-planted streets in town. One of the great opportunities we have here is to not only plant Franklin Avenue, but to underground the existing utility lines so that the street can become literally one of the most beautiful streets in town. Here you see what Franklin Avenue looks like. And that's what Jefferson looks like. The difference is simply the planting of the trees. It's worth noting that on Jefferson, there's actually a power line and the trees have grown up around it. But one of the things I would encourage the town to seize the initiative on is that any time in Princeton there's a project of this scale being developed, and if there's above ground power, the project should become the occasion for undergrounding that power. That's not just for the health of the trees, though it's one of the reasons. It's not just for the visuals, but as we all know, the incredible number of power outages we've experienced increasingly over the last 10 or 20 years, it makes our community more sustainable and less vulnerable to power outages.
Joel, this is another great presentation with great ideas. I'm just going to ask you to try to wrap it up so we stay on time.
Yep. So these are the last 2 slides. This is the project that I built in Metuchen. This shows this project is on Route 27 in Metuchen. This shows what the project looked like 15 years after it was built. This is what the project looks like in the wintertime. That's what it looks like in the spring. If a project is properly conceived and planted, within 15 years, it can start to take on the character of Jefferson Road. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And I wanted to ask if there were questions specifically for Joel on his presentation. And I see Michael Floyd has his hand up.
Yeah, Joel, I just had a quick question. You have a certain amount of building there, building volume, building mass. Why did you choose that amount and not less? What was your thinking?
I actually made a detailed analysis, Michael, of this is based on 160 apartments. The affordable units required a certain bedroom distribution. So I made an analysis of the square footage of every single one of the 160 apartments. So I knew exactly what amount of square footage I needed to service. And so the project that you see shows the 80 affordable units in the size and bedroom distribution that are needed. And it shows 80 market units in the size that they need to be compatible. But you asked a question, I think, that leads to another really important point. In my design, all of the units are the same. If you live in a 2-bedroom market apartment, if you live in a 2-bedroom affordable unit, the square footage of the apartment and the features are all the same. I think it's really important if Princeton undertakes a project like this, that they make no different differentiation inside or out.
Okay, and the bedroom mix you assumed on the market was the same mix as the affordables?
No, the bedroom mix is different for the markets. So for example, Michael, as you know, for the affordable units, 60% of the affordables need to be 2 bedrooms, 25% 3 bedrooms, and 15% 1 bedrooms. For the market units, I proposed a small number of studio apartments because there's demand for them. I proposed 0 3-bedroom market units, and I have a different mix of 1s and 2s. There's nothing wrong with having with taking that particular approach in giving the same type of apartment to both constituencies, but having some distribution.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks. And then I do see that there's another hand up, but just to get, I want to make sure we get through the presentations and have a full block for public comment at the end. So if you have your hand up, I'm just going to ask if you have a question for Joel to just hold on to that for now. And we're going to hear next from Bob Hillier. And I'd ask that, Bob, if you could show us your face and unmute yourself and share your screen.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
And there's,
we hear you, but we don't see you.
I know, and I'm trying to start my video. I think it won't work.
No, don't do it.
Okay. Now, here we go.
Try it a few times, Bob. People have had to keep pressing.
We are.
Yeah,
oh, there we go. We see you now. And then if you have a screen to share, hopefully that'll work also. Excellent.
Good. All right, Justin is going to run my slides for me rather than screen sharing. And so I'd like to take you through it. First of all, I'm calling this a village so that it does become its own neighborhood based on what Christina said. And I'm keeping it in very small scale and with a great variety of spaces that are green and a great variety of housing, from flats to townhouses to lofts to both urban townhouses and what I call suburban townhouses. So we'll go to the site plan. Justin, there we are. And I'll start at the corner of Witherspoon and Franklin. And you can see there's a round disc there, which is a fountain and a small park area, which opens up the corner for the site. And directly on Witherspoon Street is an amenity building, which could have retail in it, or could also have some craft shops for the residents of the project. You can start to actually walk as you're coming down Witherspoon Street. You can turn to the first right and take a path that leads you into the back of the project along a line of trees at the property line. And we have 15 or 16 townhouses. There are 2 sets of 8, and they are, I would call them like a Philadelphia townhouse. They're 3 stories high. The bottom story is actually a foyer for the house that is on the street. And you'll notice at the back there in the light green, each one of these townhouses has its own private courtyard. Going further along Franklin, we come to what I call the loft units, and there are 43 of them. And what's interesting about them is each one of them has its own private courtyard. I was very taken by Christina's comment that it's really nice to have an address. And so the way this is broken down is that of the 160 units, 70 of them actually have a specific front door to the unit. where you go to your own front door, which has an address, and you can actually enter the unit. Now, we also, in terms of the private green space, and this was something that Tony had pointed out early in the process, we have 80 of the units. Half of the units have their own private green space. You can also see at the far end towards Jefferson Road, I have what's called a community and town park, and I've done that specifically as a park with the sidewalk that walks along Franklin is part of this park, so that it is a park that is there for the people from Harrison Road and Jefferson Road. And I did this purposely so that when you look up Harris Road, you're looking at a park and not a set of buildings. As a result, I have densified the buildings a little bit, and I'm going to take you through that a little bit further. Now, if you come halfway along the loft units, you'll see a main stairway that takes you up into a central park to this project. And to the left of that central park is a heavily treated, what I call lounge park, which is an area with a fountain, and it's a miniature Rittenhouse kind of square with benches and lawn chairs as a quiet space. Then you have to the left of it, the larger open space. And this came about, I originally had townhouses in this center point, and Tony had suggested that the townhouses really didn't belong there. And what was I doing crowding up that central space? And so we rearranged it. This is the fourth iteration, actually. And the building that you see at 90 degrees to the back property line is a 4-story apartment building. And the building to the right of it, facing the cemetery, is a 5-story single-loaded corridor building, so that the corridor, as you're walking along, you're looking out on that green space. At the far right on the park side is a 2-story clubhouse. And so that's a second amenity space for all of the residents. Now, in the center is a brick-colored area, and that is a community plaza, basically, which would be used for get-togethers. It could even be a small farmer's market area, and it's surrounded on 2 sides by townhouses. And you'll notice all the townhouses there, plus the 1st-story apartments along the cemetery, all have back courtyards that are their own private spaces. Now we'll go to I think I've covered everything except the main entrance into the garage is in the center of the project. You'll see it's right under that blue fountain. What's important here is that there is a long circulation spine that goes from the 2 Witherspoon Street entrances all the way to the park. So you can start at Witherspoon Street and walk through and end up on the park and continue your walk along Franklin, having experienced this whole neighborhood that you just walked through. It's important to realize that you've got townhouses, lofts, apartments on a single loaded corridor, and apartments on a double loaded corridor. We only have 34 apartments that are on a double loaded corridor, which makes this a pretty unique project. Now, I'm going to show you a lot of green space in a minute, but let me take you downstairs. Next slide, please, Justin. This is the parking for 160 cars. And you can see over on the left side, where I talked about the Philadelphia townhouses, we have parking underneath those townhouses, and you go from the parking area into your own foyer and up the stairs into the townhouse. Opposite that is another row of parking, and those are the cars for the 12 units that are in the amenity building. plus additional parking for residents. And you'll see in the dark dots when you get over into the main parking garage, these are elevators and stairs that take you up into the complex, either directly into an apartment building or up to the public space above. So we'll go to the next slide, which is an important one, because here you have a cross section with Franklin on the left side. And you can see I've got somebody over on the left side of Franklin looking up, and he or she cannot see the 5-story building at the back, which is on the cemetery, close to the cemetery property line. Notice also that the loft apartments start with a courtyard. There's a 5-foot fence or a 5-foot brick wall, actually, which gives you a private courtyard. Then you enter that loft unit, and it has a 10-foot, 6-inch ceiling height. And then at the back of it, you go up 2.5 feet, and you have a bedroom area which overlooks the living room area and also looks out on the street. And that's, for some reason, has been called a slingshot unit because it's deep, it's 34 feet deep, and yet it has a 10.5-foot ceiling. Now, if you go up one level, you'll see that the next unit up is set back slightly, and it also has a direct entrance from the plaza, the elevated plaza. And on the back side, it has a courtyard, which is on the roof of the first floor unit. Notice that the railings are sloped out, and that's done so that you're not invited to really look over and look down on your neighbor. But more importantly, we're putting a highly reflective white surface on the inside of that wall, and you can see lightly the sunlight coming down. And this is for Heidi, who has raised the point about these units facing north. This will bounce the southern sunlight into the units. On the top floor, there's a corridor that walks that carries you along, overlooking the central green space. And these units are double in their width. And as you can see, they're more shallow. They also have a deck that overlooks Franklin Avenue with the same reflective railing. And they are, it's again, a single loaded corridor. Now let's go over to the far right, and you see the 5-story building. And the first story, again, has individual entrances into those units. And then above it are 4 stories of a glass corridor overlooking the central garden space. And so it's a single loaded corridor, and these units all get south light. Justin, could we go back to the first slide for 1 minute?
Yeah, and I just want to interject here. This is another really wonderful presentation, but I want to make sure we have time to get through all of them.
Okay.
So if you could wrap up.
I'll speed it up. You notice on the central building, the 4-story apartment building, that it has bay windows that are projected out, so they also capture the southern sun. I just wanted to point that out. Let's move on to keep going. Okay, this is Copperwood, and I want to show you that this is a 4-story building that is sitting on top of a parking lot and a parking garage, and these are the planting beds that are growing in 16 inches of soil. And the point is that you can have a wonderfully green environment. Go back one, please, Justin. You can see a wonderful green environment which separates the units. Our minimum separation of buildings here is 48 feet, but in the project that I'm proposing to you, the minimum distance is 70 feet on that green space. Now we'll go quickly to the next slide. This is the corner of Witherspoon and Franklin. It shows the fountain and it shows the stairway that carries you up into that second area behind the townhouses. You see the townhouses going off to the left. And there, as I said, there are 8 in a row. And then there's a green space between them and the next 8. Next slide. This is up on the main green space. That's the clubhouse at the back. And here you can see how you can have direct access. You see the man in the suit, direct access into your apartments on this level. So you have a specific address and number on this plaza. Next slide. This is the view along of Franklin Avenue. And you can see we've put a brick wall there to define the private courtyards going into these first-story units, and then a sloped wooden wall that goes back to the unit itself. The intention here is to use a thin brick and basically white siding, so it's and we would probably vary from here and there the color of the brick. The last slide, next one. This is the entire complex. You can see the building on the right is the 3 stories above the retail and that entrance courtyard at the corner. Then the 2 sets of, I call them urban townhouses. And at the far distance, you can see the loft and the park. And now we'll put that into the context of the project. The next slide shows you it's set in there with Avalon, and you can see the tall building in the back, the 5-story building, is not visible from the street, and in fact, the setback of the lofts makes the whole elevation along there quite interesting. And that's concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Bob. And next, because we are pushing up against time, I want to move on to the next presentation, which is Josh Cinder. And Josh, if you could, I see you there, hello. And if you can share your screen and go ahead.
Is it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Time flew.
I know,
She was rushing.
Hello, hello. My name is Joshua Zinder. My architectural firm is in town. I live on Moore Street, and I own a number of properties in the Witherspoon-Jackson Historic District. I invested on both sides of this project. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to present with all the other architects who have put so much thought into this challenge. Our office utilized this as a creative session to stretch our design legs. Our 12 architectural staff developed 8 different designs, and over a period of weeks, melded the ideas and our preliminary thoughts into, thoughts on zoning into 2 schemes. Neither of these schemes are what we feel is right for the site now. However, as an educational tool, it was invaluable for us to understand the site constraints and potential program and the overall vision. Now we have a clear understanding of how to achieve the major goals for this project in a neighborly and site-sensitive manner. The 80 affordable units in each scheme are scattered throughout the project, which have 166 and 160 units total respectively. So the goal is that you cannot tell which is an affordable unit and which is a market unit. We believe a true mixed income model is inclusionary and the socially responsible path for development. Another consideration we took was that we looked at for both schemes was to make the entire project ZNE, zero net energy. In California, it's required when developing affordable housing projects to make them ZNE. And if they can do it, there should be no reason why we can't do it here in Princeton. Passive house is one of the prescriptive paths for ZNE. The schemes present ideas. They are not hard and fast solutions, just some of many thoughts we had in the process. And remember, when architects design in a vacuum without community or client input, budgets tend to not be a factor. In the final execution, budget will be critical. So we started the process with a zoning analysis, looking at the overall site. Here you see it from above. We created this model and shared it with all the other architects. We looked at viewscapes and the spaces between sidewalk and physical structures all along Franklin and comparing that to the existing. And then we also looked at what it could be as well. So with the current R4A zoning regulation, it would basically max out somewhere around 45 units. It would be 62,000 square feet, and they would be restricted to 1.5 stories. If we were to apply the Avalon Bay zoning, which I'm not recommending, the MMRO regulation, it would set up for a 5-story structure that would occupy a tremendous amount of the site, which you see here. We tried to look at what was the maximum zoning envelope. You know, what were the proper setbacks from structures, you know, existing structures, the Avalon Bay townhouse structures and the park, and you know, what might be a reasonable setback and pitch angle, you know, in addition to that setback all around the site, which creates a volume something like this. And you know, there are other considerations like Witherspoon Street. Ideally, you're going to maintain the street edge, and back towards Jefferson Street, you're going to have a residential buffer area. You know, and that's what we talked about here, having buffers. So with these pitchback angles, you know, it's going to reduce your height of your building along Franklin to, you know, 2, possibly 3 stories, but at the same time allow for the development to grow up to 4 stories. And when we say 4 stories, it's 4 stories on top of a podium. The site pitches north to south on average about 10 feet. So that's really substantial. And so, you know, the appearance of the building will be a 4-story building, even though it is actually 5 stories. And that sets up a maximum volume of something like this with context buffers. We also started to look at access. At one point we were studying bringing a road through. It was decided that probably wasn't the way to do it, but this type of scheme sets up 3 separate districts. It allows for access to parking aligned with other streets so that when cars are coming in and out of the development, they're not pointing into any of the other residences, which we think is really important. Here you see that. The unit counts, you know, we figured there are lots of different ways you could push it up to 200, as Marina pointed out, but somewhere around 160 is where you maximize the balance of park space, open space, and the density. Here again, noting that access points into the site want to be across from the existing drives to connect them in. And then also green buffer spaces, you know, throughout the site are going to be important. This is the first of the 2 schemes. This is, we call it Franklin Muse and Park. We wanted to maintain the scale and context along the streetscape of Witherspoon and Franklin. We used 2- and 3-story height townhouses in this first layer of the site plan with taller bar buildings beyond. So if I could just go back for a second. So here you see the 2- and 3-story buildings, and they're grouped in clusters. The thought was that would allow the development to grow, you know, over time. And then the bar buildings, and when I say bar buildings, it's just are simple rectangular buildings that are set behind in a park setting. And this is all on top of a podium, allowing for that 10-foot setback. The one exception is we did place some surface parking behind the Witherspoon area. This scheme has 166 proposed units. It's on top of that podium parking, as we mentioned. Sectionally, we were looking at some innovative solutions, trying to minimize the amount of circulation space within the units. The basic idea here was mixing duplexes and flats so that you could end up with hallways that are skip stopped so that you can get into a duplex, which has its own internal stair. get into a flat. Some of the duplexes would go up, some of the duplexes would go down, and then there would be flats up for the top floor, which would have internal stairs off the hallway, which would allow you to go up. Also here, you can see that we are starting to leverage solar angles for the bar buildings in this case. And then there would be access from the parking structures to the townhouses as well. Here you see an overall section through the site. Here's an elevation along Franklin Street from Witherspoon all the way to Jefferson. For some precedents for the design, we looked at Palmer Square. This idea of an entire block built as one project at the same time with the intent of reading as different facades, massing, and the buildings as though they were collected over time is really, one that's fascinating, and it feels like it's been there forever. There are certain elements and details and materials that are repeated throughout. So there's stone, there's shingles, there's stucco, and these come throughout. For the formal language of the lower massing, we use a diversity of materials, building heights, and window reveals in an attempt to animate in what would otherwise be a flat plane and also create more delineation between the massing. There's a nice articulation of window reveals, repetition that we use in our design, as well as the play of massing and building heights. We created a rhythm for the openings in our facade study by creating reveals, also functioning for shading since Franklin Avenue faces northwest. We also use several materials found on other projects in town. We played with their use on the facade and plugged them into the grid. We created different townhouse types that are repeated along the street. In summary, we wanted to paint a picture that is contextual through the use of materials, scale, formal language, with the goal of being able to create an animated and diverse streetscape. So here you see that close up. Here you see the project from above, and we have these, the bar buildings have these large photovoltaic systems that come up and over. The building on the end is 3 stories, whereas all the other buildings are 4. So it has a bigger setback from Jefferson area, and also you'll see that the access to the parking all aligns with the streets. And I'm just going to sort of walk you around the project here. And then I have a quick fly around. It's a bit speedy, but didn't want to take up too much time. Here you see the mix of units. The mix of units along the street are actually 3 units that are repeated over and over again in different ways. And then the bar buildings contain a mix of flats and duplexes. And then, that's along Franklin Street. And then we have a promenade or a muse that runs the length of the project past the different park areas that could easily connect into the cemetery if it was desired. And here you see what those are. And then there are public amenities that are in the bottom floor of all the bar buildings and on the corner of Witherspoon Jackson. And just go back out the front. And so the corner of Witherspoon Jackson would have some amenity space, and that's the whole project. Here you see the photovoltaic skins. Again, budget was not a really huge idea, but it also sets up rooftop amenities and things like that that could be really nice for the community aspect of the project. So if we continue, the second model that we had was a university model. We call it our 4 quad scheme. When we look at Princeton, not just Princeton University, but also you could look at Westminster Choir College. There's a really strong precedent in our community for 3-sided courtyards. Multiple buildings assembling to create an outdoor public space. Certainly Princeton has numerous examples of this. And so that's what we applied to the site here. In this case, we ended up with 4 quads. The one closest to Witherspoon Street would be a more urban hardscape, and the other ones would be greenscape. And this also sets up, we have a mix of smaller buildings, so 2- and 3-story duplexes with accents of 4-story elements, similar to the way a university quad might have, accents, towers at entry points and corners. We also use the 4-story areas as garage entry elements as well, putting a smaller 2-story element on the corner around the end quad. That is also on top of a large podium, providing parking for the 160 units. A mix of sections throughout the project. So here we have the small townhouses. Through the middle, we have flats, mix of amenity spaces with the parking. And then the smaller ones are stacked duplexes where you can have access from Franklin Street for a duplex, or you can have access into your private little garden off of the quad, which I'll show you. Then here's another section through the whole site and the other elevation along Franklin. Here you see the overall project, the urban quad with its stair going up to connecting promenade through the middle, connecting all 4 quads. On the other side, here you see the 2- and 3-story buildings have steps and step back from Franklin, and the 4-story elements end up having parking. There are parking entrances directly underneath them, so they actually align with the street. We also put in a stair and sort of streetscape viewing point that connects you to the main quad. Some of the differences in material, some stucco, some siding, some metal panels.
Josh, this is another, I hate to have to keep doing this, another amazing presentation, but.
So I just have one other video and then that's it. And then here's the 4 quad scheme. So this takes you down Franklin, you see the access points, you see the public stair and handicap accessible as well. And continuing, we go around into that last quad, which has the lower building, similar to what's on in the Jefferson Moore area. Up through, there's a connecting pathway that connects all the quads. Here you see the private courts on both sides of the main quad, and it runs all the way through. Private courts again here, out back to the urban quad. Down. And this is a taller building along Witherspoon that might match, 205 Witherspoon, which is just a couple buildings away in height. And that's it.
Great, thank you. And having the 3D fly through is really helpful. So thank you for putting that together. I know that represents a lot of work. I want to make sure that we have time to hear from the public, because that's a big part of this meeting, is getting people's reactions. I know that Tony, you wanted to have another brief set of comments, but I'm asking that you try to keep that as condensed as possible so we have time to hear from folks. Tony Nellison, wanted to invite you again to, if you wanted to make some final comments before we hear from the public.
Okay, unmuted. Okay, what I'm going to do is just very quickly here is to go through what condensed itself into a series of design goals for the project that took all of this incredible amount of work and broke it down into a set of design goals. Now, the first one was really buildings. There's three categories: buildings, public spaces, and then parking and access. So here's the first one. Building must have 80 affordable units optimally with equal number of market rate units to ensure that development is inclusive and at the highest possible quality. So that was really one of the first pieces. Secondly, the buildings must generate a pride of place with individual expressions, including multiple buildings, multiple and preferable unique entrances, stoop stairs, bay windows, etc. The exterior material should be contextual, providing human scale interest in all facades, not just the front. Long facades especially need changes in materials, textures, and colors. Avoid institutional and isolated look feel by creating pedestrian connections into and through the site. Buildings should have a variety of heights from 2.5 stories along the east end, 2 and 3 stories on the Witherspoon side, and 4 to 5 stories step back from the street. Facades along the street edge should be pedestrian friendly, human scale elements and features, windows, entrances, planters, and seating walls. And the buildings along Witherspoon Street must match adjacent setbacks. And the non-residential uses should be included in the Witherspoon Street at the corner of Witherspoon and Franklin exclusively. Now, as we then the next set of the next images were continued. The buildings must have a car. Sorry, okay. The parking and access. Parking shall be in the basement level of the buildings, 1/2 below grade. Surface parking should be seriously discouraged. Both streetscapes, Franklin Avenue and Witherspoon Street, should be designed with complete street criteria with landscaping, street trees, decorative lighting, sidewalks, and bike path. And Franklin Avenue should be redesigned to incorporate bike lanes, parallel parking, delivery, drop-off, pickup, cutouts, and entrance to parking. And parking access should be from Franklin Avenue only, ideal only across from existing alleys and streets, avoiding parking entrances east of Harrison Street. Now, the greening of the site has been the building should be high performance passive solar certified. Buildings should be sited to maximize solar access, maximizing light and air to each unit. Plans for future solar to realize net zero energy. Site must be extensively landscaped, including all on-site plazas and gardens using native plants. Maximize the semi-public space in front of building using low hedges, decorative fencing to define these landscape spaces. Garden design must include rain water detention, rain gardens, and other green infrastructure. Green roofs are encouraged with community access. There must be a range of open spaces, some covered, open for all seasons of the year for residents of all ages and various possible activities. Private balconies, gardens for individual units are encouraged. Adequate provision for composting, recycling, and landfill. Comply with the green energy, environmental, sustainable elements of the master plan, and ensure that all landscaping is properly maintained at the highest landscape standard and all plants and trees for the duration of the project life. These were the goals that were agreed on by this group of designers after 6 months now of discussion. And what you saw today, remarkable set of presentations, were really a synthesis of, I think, for instance, Bob Hilliard, I think he said, did 5 or 6 schemes. Josh did 4 or 5 schemes. I did 3 schemes. Joel did 4 or 5 schemes. It was really fantastic to hear this interaction by these people pro bono. And at the end, it results in a series of design goals. And if there is anything, and of course, no specific project is complete here. Obviously, this is probably the 2nd or 3rd step in this process. And we need to now go into, there's going to be community reaction. There's a community task force. Then there's going to be an RFP for architects. Then there's going to be.
I'm just going to cut you off because I do want to make sure that we have time for the community reaction.
Those are the goals that came out of this. And by the way, they're publicly available for anybody to begin to read.
Great, thank you. And we're going to talk at the end of the meeting just about immediate next steps. And part of that will be putting this presentation and all these materials up on the website. It always feels like, we start this meeting with 3 hours. It feels like a ton of time, but it's, we have over 80 people on this call. And I'm sure everybody would like to have a half hour to just download their thoughts. But we're going to do our best now to have a conversation. there was a request to read the petition, and so I lost it here on my screen, but I'm going to try to pull it back up and read it so it's on the record. This is the Franklin Neighbors Petition. We, the undersigned, live on the streets surrounding the Franklin Avenue parking lot. Our neighborhood is diverse with homes of modest scale and a population that includes many with moderate or low or fixed incomes. We thoroughly support building 80 units of court-ordered affordable housing on Franklin Avenue, and we look forward to welcoming new neighbors. However, we believe the town's proposal to build a further 80 units for more affluent renters who have other options is not in the best interest of our neighborhood. The addition of market rate units could result in a total of 160 apartments with up to 440 to 500 new residents. The effect would be to add the population equivalent of a small town on the Franklin lot. We do not think this reflects sound planning. In addition, to accommodate 160 apartments, the town has adopted zoning to permit buildings of up to 5.5 stories with permission for commercial storefronts on Franklin. The permitted structure would be drastically out of scale with the surrounding streetscapes and would significantly and negatively impact the quality of life for present and future residents. We ask our representatives to significantly reduce the number of market rate units so that the new affordable housing development on Franklin will harmonize with this neighborhood, maximize green open space, and provide a pleasing environment for the new residents. We or our designated representatives want to be involved in all stages of the planning process to ensure that the rental complex reflects the diversity and charm of this neighborhood. And it's signed by numerous residents. And again, the petition is part of this agenda packet. And I do want to open up the public comment now. If you would like to speak, don't raise your actual hand because I can't see you, but raise your virtual hand. And I wanted to start with Ron Berlin. Ron, hopefully you can be brought over, and if you unmute yourself.
I've just unmuted. There we are.
Great.
I'd like to could I just put up one image, please?
I believe so.
I just want to give me 1 second. I just want to bring him over. Give me 1 second to bring him over to allow him to do that. I'm going to send him back, and I'm going to bring you back over.
Okay.
I'm looking for some.
Yep.
Hold on.
If that's going to take more than a minute, then maybe we should go to somebody else first.
It won't. He's back.
Okay. Okay. We can see your screen, Ron. We just can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. This is really fantastic. I don't have anything graphic to offer except for this simple image as a reference. So I've self-demoted from Princeton Future to public comment, but I don't mind a bit. First, a question with a comment. I think, though you've already addressed this, what's to become of the present residents of the Princeton Housing Authority houses on Franklin? Because it really seems only fair that they'd be assured places in the new homes that replace the old ones they live in now. So I really hope that Council and Housing Authority can find a way to make that happen. I'd just like to make a few observations about this Franklin project, which in its essential ambitions, I very enthusiastically support. This isn't my immediate neighborhood. I live a half a mile or so away and out of this picture. But it's on my street, which I know very well. I speak as an architect and a town guy. When I first started to think about Franklin about 2 years ago, I absolutely embraced the idea of density on the site. It's a quick walk not only to downtown, but to no less than 3 public schools. It's perfect. 80 units would be more tightly packed than the neighborhood of Lee and Birch nearby, but with a mix of duplexes and row houses and a few 4-unit multifamily houses, the fit could probably be accomplished while still maintaining the fundamental character of the adjoining neighborhoods to the east and west. And what is that character? Houses, places that you enter individually from the street, each with a bit of connection to nature, even if it's just a patch of turf and a little bird song, a place for a barbecue or a couple of chairs and a table, a sense of an individual my place that you can come on over to. This is Christina's notion of address, incidentally. That character can't be achieved for the entire site, though, with the affordable market rate mix that's being contemplated now. Apartments are needed, and lots of them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with apartment living. I'm working on 2 apartment projects in New York City right now. But let's face it, the experience of place is quite different inside and out. Lobbies, corridors, parking garages, area lights, ventilation fans, it's a different scene. As a kid in Queens, New York City, on my daily 1.5-mile trek to and from high school, I walked from a neighborhood of single-family homes through a mixed one of row houses and duplexes and multifamily homes. And then at a certain point, I entered the domain of apartment buildings. Gone were the stoops and the little front gardens and porches. Now,
Ron, I'm sorry to interrupt. I should have said this at the top. We're asking people to keep their comments to 3 minutes so we have a chance to hear from everybody.
oh, I got to get through this. I'll be really quick. Look, here's what I suggest. Let's not come upon the new apartment buildings abruptly, but instead create a transition to them so that this development becomes a friendly handshake between its flanking neighborhoods. If you look at the aerial view of this part of Princeton, Avalon Bay's buildings jump out as the biggest in the area. That green swath of Jefferson Road here, that neighborhood to the east wants to continue south right across this site until it meets the cemetery, instead of having a tall monolithic building poking deeply into its flank. So let the tallest apartment building be situated in the deepest part of the property and end more or less at the midline of the houses on the west side of Harris. And from that point to the east, let there be a decent run of houses and duplexes, building types that meet the street and the earth the way houses do. In the apartment structures, a parking podium on grade would make for the worst and most institutional experience. And I think we've got that set here. Like, there's no argument about that. But if the ground floor of the units along Franklin are maisonette apartments with independent front doors facing the street, the experience will be vastly more pleasant, like a foreground of townhouses that have merged with a larger structure behind them. So I'm down to this. I'm plugging for the transition. And I believe it is council's obligation to take that transition seriously, as respect for the existing context of neighborhood character is embedded in the Princeton Master Plan. Yes, the housing types that would enable the transition would cost more to construct than all apartments all the time, but their market rate units would also yield higher rents that would partly compensate. They would offer a bit of a buffer to the immediate neighbors on Harrison and Jefferson so that the taller buildings do not loom. And the lower front piece would do the same on Witherspoon. The Jefferson Road neighborhood in particular is one of the gems of Princeton, lined with its consistent arcade of sycamore trees with wonderfully varied houses of similar scale, like individual personalities in civil conversation. I embrace the new, exemplified by the Franklin Project's dense mix of affordable and market dwellings, a forward-looking social experiment in physical form. We're doomed if we cannot adapt to changed circumstances with novel invention, and providing this housing is a bold move that will benefit this town. At the same time, I feel that we are only the temporary custodians of Princeton at this moment in time. We oughtn't erase its lovelier features, but save them to be appreciated by those who follow us. In our eagerness to repair the world, let's be careful not to tear some of its finest fabric. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I want to put in just a plea to everybody. I know we all have a lot of strong feelings about this site, it's unfair to everybody if we don't try to stick to that 3-minute time limit. I'm going to remind people, if you want to finish your thoughts when you get to 3 minutes, that's fine. But I'm really asking, just in respect to everybody else, that we try to make sure that there's time for everybody to get their voice heard. I just want to also say that the most useful comments at this juncture are ones that really speak to the design pieces of this and recognizing that there's going to be trade-offs. I think we saw a lot of ideas in the presentations, different amounts of green space versus height, for example, where the green space would go. And we really want to hear, you know, what your reactions are specifically to what you saw earlier this morning. So we have several hands up. I'm going to do 3 names at a time. So first, Rosemary Kelly. And after Rosemary, we'll hear from Sam Bunting.
Good morning. I live on Witherspoon Lane, which abuts to the backyard to the very narrowest part of the Franklin Avenue project. So my concern is the density of this. When I look back, and our picnic area is right by 4 to 5 story buildings. What is the setback from our property line? The privacy landscaping, you think of streetscapes, but what about our backyardscape? And are there noise abatement thoughts on this? And I'll sign off and listen to answers if there are. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And actually, I wanted to address a question that Ron had at the very beginning of his comments that I think it's important to put on the record that we're very committed to the people who are living right now in the Franklin and Maple Terrace properties. And the idea would be that this new development would be built in phases, and the first part that was built would be for the housing of the current residents of Franklin and Maple. It's, you know, we're not going to be making people homeless through this project. That would be totally defeating the point of it. So it is important to say on the record. So thank you for that opportunity. And I don't know if there's anybody who wants to respond to Rosemary at this time, or if we just want to, I think we'll make sure we have time to hear from people, I would say. So maybe let's just put a plug in that, and we'll have some time at the end if council members want to respond to what we've heard, if that's okay, unless somebody is itching to respond at this moment.
I just sort of suggest that for any general things like that, Michael Laplace is taking notes on the comments, and that we should take them to the task force that will be working on finalizing the
Right.
standards.
Okay. So next we'll hear from Sam Bunting, and then Harold Heft is next.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor, for taking my comment. I'm a resident of Dempsey Avenue, and I want to weigh in on this project. I just want to thank Princeton Future for hosting this very helpful session. And I was really struck at how nice the design concepts that were presented by Bob Hillier and Josh Cinder. And I really would be very excited to see some of the ideas that were expressed in those concepts come to fruition. I'm also concerned about the current opposition to having that market rate blend, because it just strikes me as such a big advantage to have a mixture of incomes on the site. And although it does result in a somewhat higher density, I really don't think that it's going to be so far out of whack that it's going to cause a whole lot of problems. I know there were a lot of concerns expressed about the density of the Avalon Bay project whenever that was built. And, you know, a lot of those concerns didn't really come to happen. You know, it wasn't the case that the sewers were overburdened or the traffic became a complete gridlock. So I would just urge people to be open-minded about the possibilities that are present on this site, and to try to work with some of the nice ideas that we saw today to make something nice happen. The difference between this project and Avalon Bay, of course, is that instead of having some corporate behemoth driving the train, we've got some very responsive and intelligent local architects who are bringing forward some really nice ideas. So I really applaud that. And I also want to make it clear that, although I don't live directly adjacent to the site, I am very interested in it, and I'm concerned that the town is potentially proposing a lot of 100% affordable projects as part of the Mount Laurel settlement. And the town has a responsibility to financially backstop all of those projects. And when we go towards 100% projects, I'm fine with them, but, to the extent that it puts Princeton taxpayers potentially on the hook for filling out any financial problems that arise if the low-income housing tax credits don't come through, that seems like a big concern to me. So I would be very enthusiastic instead of going towards one of these nice market rate blends, work with the neighbors, come up with something nice, and build something that will make everybody proud.
Great, thank you, Sam, for those comments. So next, Harold Heft, and then Kip Cherry will be next after that. And I just want to remind folks, thank you for those for keeping their comments to 3 minutes, and to really, if you can focus in on the designs that you've seen today and your reactions, things that you liked about them, things that you didn't like about them, especially ones that showed, two different approaches. So go ahead, Harold.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, presenters. I think you'll find I'm following the rules here. There have been some great ideas and fascinating designs, and there's much to be hopeful about from what's been presented by these talented folks. Like many of my neighbors in the surrounding areas, I of course have some concerns about the concepts presented. I live on Jefferson, and the alley behind our home is directly adjacent to the Franklin lot. So here are some specific comments on the presentations. On Joel Schwartz's great presentation. Like all of the presentations, most of the sight lines were taken from Franklin Avenue. And they may be and Schwartz's presentation may look okay from Franklin Avenue, but it negatively affects those who are directly adjacent to the lot along the alley from Jefferson Road. There are 4-story buildings with extremely insufficient setbacks from the Jefferson alleyway. And in addition, the garage and roadway run along the alley, which means constant noise and exhaust pollution. I also feel that the widening of Franklin will attract more traffic. I haven't done a scientific study on it, obviously, to an already dangerous intersection at Franklin and Jefferson, where there's a lot of school kids going to the high school. With regard to the Hillier presentation, the open space across from Harris and along from the alleyway seems like a really good solution to some of our concerns about setbacks and open space. However, the visibility of the 4- and 5-story buildings may be okay from Franklin again, but the 5-story units would loom over the backyards along the Jefferson alleyway. Do we need all of that height other than to maximize the number of market rate units? The brick wall barriers along Franklin, to me, seem unattractive. And the height scale from Witherspoon to Jefferson, where it goes from lower on Witherspoon to higher approaching Jefferson, seems to me to be exactly the opposite of what it should be. Josh Zinder's presentation, wonderful to see the 3D animation. For both proposals, I have, again, a concern about the setback along the alleyway. It seems to me to still be insufficient, particularly in the Franklin Muse proposal. The 3-story units close to the alleyway might be better if they were reduced to 2 stories. Then a final question, and this goes to a certain extent to Sam Bunting's comments. Marina Rubin displayed the statement, density is abstract. What does that mean? Density, to me, seems to be one of the most concrete aspects of any development proposal related to the new units and its relationship to the surrounding community. So those are my comments. I hope I followed your rules, Mayor, and thank you all for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kip Cherry is next, and then Arlene. So go ahead, Kip. I think you've been brought over and you just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm Kip Cherry. I was born and raised in Princeton, and I have just a couple comments. I think the mixed income is great. It doesn't have to be 50-50. Now, going to the design issues, I feel that there should be a stronger street presence than some of the designs showed, some kind of connection to the street, porches. I'm very keen on porches in Princeton, and I would like to see a way in which people can be enjoying their units and connecting with people walking by. The other thing is I'm very concerned about the cemetery, and nobody has mentioned that at all, in terms of the fact that the cemetery is a very private place for people to do private things, and there's a lot of history in the cemetery. And I don't feel that the massing of these buildings, the presence of the tall buildings towards the rear of the site, take into account what that does to the experience of being in the cemetery. And so I feel that that's a design criteria that really has been missing. And I think that a lot more consideration needs to go into how these tall buildings facing the cemetery will affect the experience of being there. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So next is Arlene, or Earlene, and then will be Linda Hickson Gilmore.
Yes. I believe you mean Erling Beaumont. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Yes. I sent an email to you, Mayor, in regard to this, and one aspect that you have ignored, that everybody's ignored during their presentations, and that is the actual experience of people who live in a mixed environment of both low-cost housing and market value. So I hope that I will be able to read my very short letter and make a few comments. About 3 years ago, I moved into an apartment at Avalon, and 100 Albert Way, and I don't think you've heard from anybody that actually lives in Avalon. You've heard from people that are in the residential areas, but actually, I don't think you've heard from anybody from Avalon itself. One of the reasons why I moved to Avalon was that I wanted to live in a mix of all types of peoples and families. It was a good decision. In normal times, we all enjoyed together game nights, Valentine making, and pumpkin carving. We would meet each other's in the lounge or in the courtyard. There are 56 low-cost housing units in the complex. No one seems to care or to know which person lives in market or low-cost housing. All races, cultures, ages, and economic levels make up the residents who live together here. It works for us all. In my opinion, it is the ideal way to live. I look forward to our new neighbors and hope they can be integrated into the larger Avalon community. So I have a couple comments to make about the presentation. One is that I feel in order for the residents to be together as a community, that a community house is pretty essential. You can't have your game nights, Valentine making, and pumpkin carving without a place to be able to do that. And you can't do that with just park areas. You need to have a community place. The other consideration, which I hope you make, which I don't think anybody did, is living in a multi-area residential area. You have to take into consideration people moving in and out, and you have a lot of units that are there, and having people move in and out can be very disconcerting to the residents, particularly if there aren't enough elevators or ways for the people to be able to move their furnishings in and out, and it disturbs the residents that are living there. So I hope that that is taken into consideration, how you will have the moving vans come in, how you will have the furniture taken up and down without just taking into consideration so it doesn't disturb the residents. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to give my viewpoint.
Thank you for those comments, and apologies for butchering your name. Next is Linda Hickson Gilmore, and then Michael Floyd.
Thank you. I am a resident of Princeton, but I also I work for Nassau Presbyterian Church, which owns Princeton Cemetery, and I work with the cemetery. So really, Kip made a lot of the comment that I wanted to make, that I heard so much about the views from Franklin, which I know is really important to the neighborhood. And I'm very supportive of, adding affordable housing. And I think the concept of mixed is really good, but I didn't hear anybody's presentation talk about the views from the cemetery. And it felt like in a lot of cases, the concepts were really concentrating the taller buildings very close to the property line at the back of the cemetery. So I would just request that the impact on this wonderful resource in our town that the cemetery is could be considered in this process, as well as the Franklin Avenue impact.
Thank you for your comment. Next is Michael Floyd, and then Virginia Kerr.
Okay, I think going backward or from the end, I think a general statement for all the designs, and I know that it'll get fleshed out later. I worry about the need for some type of service roads for the interior of the site, for trash removal, things like that. Perhaps going through the garage underground for Mr. Hillier's design would work. I don't know. Josh's design, if I heard it right, 2 concepts, which were good for food for thought. But he said, if I heard right, not concepts that are right for this site. I did think the 4 quad concept provided a lot of open space, but that so much open space that it made the buildings have to be bigger. And I think with all the municipal parks and schools nearby, I'm not sure that this development would need as much open space as that concept had. I think going back with Mr. Hillier's design, I guess I like that. I also figured that if there were going to be less units, you just take some floors off of the 5-story building. Joel mentioned something about zoning or development on Witherspoon Street is like town center development, and I don't believe that's true. The heights and that are permitted on Witherspoon Street in the RB zone and down around this area are actually, I think, only maximum 45 feet, but there's not any comparison there. Marina Rubino did mention some of the generally financing aspects and the need for a deep subsidy on an 80-unit concept. That was part of her presentation. I'm not sure how big a deep subsidy. I think Christiana Folio is the person to speak about the financial end and tax credits and things like that. And I look forward, going forward, hearing from her, at a different time, the specifics on that. And that relates also to a couple things. One thing that the Housing Authority stressed, that it's going to be, hope to be an income generating for the Housing Authority. I understand that, to help them rehab. And I guess the question out there is how much income is enough? Because that relates to how many units you develop too. With Heidi, I had a question, just if there's any other adjustments except for solar that a site plan would need to really complement the passive house development concepts. And lastly, Ms. Nelson, he did mention the magnificent large homes on Jefferson, which is true, but there's a whole lot of modest 1.5, 2-story houses mixed on Jefferson and on Harris, where I live. So they're not all magnificent large houses. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Next is Virginia Kerr, and then Richard Ryan.
Good morning. I'm Virginia Kerr, and I live on Jefferson Road. I just wanted to start by clarifying or asking for a clarification when it's appropriate about the status of the design goals that the planner outlined. My sense is that those are goals that have been extracted from the presentations that were made today, and they're not fixed as yet. And in particular, I think it's already clear there's some disagreement about density and whether 160 units is the appropriate density. And that leads me to my second point. I believe Sam Bunting described, I'm one of 128 neighbors who sent, who have signed the petition that you read, Liz. And that petition very clearly says we support affordable housing, but we question whether the additional 80 units is good for the neighborhood, whether that density is good. That is not a petition that opposes mixed income development. And I think it's really important to say that. We're not opposing mixed income development. We're saying we are concerned about the density. I would like to echo, to the extent that I understood Ron Berlin's concerns about density and Harold Heff's concerns. I thought all the presentations were really interesting, but one thing that struck me was that in all of them that showed 5-story or 4-story buildings, it just seemed to me that in real time, that was not going to be what I would hope this project would be. I think the idea of having entrances that are congruent with existing drives across the street is good. I have a question about widening Franklin Avenue. I think Harold Heff pointed out that there's a lot of traffic. We've had a number of really bad accidents at the corner of Jefferson and Franklin. Children walk, a lot of school kids walk from the Jackson Witherspoon neighborhood to the high school along Franklin. And so I think one factor that needs to be considered is the safety of kids walking along that street. I like the extent to which all of the presenters were concerned about green space, and like the idea of a streetscape along Franklin that integrates this development with the rest of the neighborhood. And I am concerned about the mechanicals. I believe the first, I can't remember her name, was also concerned about that. Where are the mechanicals going to be? I mean, what are the noise issues going to be? And I think one of the goals should be a design that stops noise. And okay, I think my time must be up, Liz. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I very much appreciate your self-monitoring on that. And thank you for those comments. So next is Richard Ryan and then Martha Friedman. And just to directly answer one of your questions, Virginia, the design guidelines for this project have not been set. That is the purpose. One of the large purposes of this meeting is to start a discussion on that and get some feedback from the neighbors and from the design professionals in the community and everybody else. So we can take those ideas and inform what the design criteria are going to be. So next is Richard Ryan and then Martha Friedman.
Hi there, thank you. I hope I'm unmuted, am I?
Yes.
Oh, good, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a member of the Princeton Future Board, so I got a chance to sit in on some of these design sessions. I'm also a neighbor about a 5 or a 6 minute walk away from the site. And just to address the issue of density, is it a specific concept or is it an abstract? And if we look at it as a specific, we're always going to say that 160 units is going to be twice as bad as 80. So if you don't like 80, oh my gosh, 160 must be twice as bad. But I think there are some examples in town of projects that are similarly dense. I think we're talking 50 units per acre. And there's a little apartment building, about 38 or 40 units, I believe, down at Prospect Avenue and Murray Place. It ends up being about 50 units per acre. You drive by, you'd never know it. So it is abstract in a certain sense, but there's qualitative issues that go along with this. And I think I've been listening to the comments here today and also at the planning board meeting, council meeting earlier. And I think some of the opponents and some of the people with the concerns from Jefferson Road have raised a few really good issues that I think can be used as a way to create sort of a grading system for any project that you choose to take on. And those points real quickly are sunlight. People worry about this project putting them in a shadow. I think that each of these projects, each of these presentations today could be looked at from the sunlight issue and judged accordingly. I think they all come out looking pretty good. Ron Berlin mentioned the transition from one side from the Jefferson side over to Witherspoon and the idea of a handshake. And I think you can evaluate these projects also on the question of how well they meet that transition. A couple people mentioned open space. I know originally people had the idea that this whole parking lot could be turned into a park. That was quite a few years ago, I think, but could there be a parklet here to go with this, this housing development? And I think a number of the schemes that we saw today showed wonderful little parklets, including Bob Hillier's that showed the park down at the Jefferson Street end. And in response to Harold Heft's point about that building overshadowing the alley there on Jefferson Road, I can't quite recall the width. I'd like to be reminded of the width of that park, because I think Bob had his 5-story building set quite a ways back from Jefferson. Also, there's the question of parking and traffic. I think that it's easy to say, gee, we got a parking lot that nobody uses now. There's going to be more traffic. On the other hand, I think that parking lot used to have spaces for about 170 cars. I went over there the other day and walked I saw 4 alleys of about 43 spaces per alley. And that's a lot of parking that used to go in there. There was a lot of traffic around the hospital. I think the walkability of this site is going to make it even less burdensome on parking. And next to last, pedestrian safety. A number of people have mentioned pedestrian safety. I think that's a great thing to keep in mind, including Virginia, who just spoke. And I think the widening of Franklin that we talked about here was also consistent with, was accompanied by adding a parking lane. So the actual roadway, the traffic way might actually be reduced. And I think it would help slow down the traffic on pedestrians. So I had all those ideas, and then this morning, Marina makes her presentation. So I got to add in one more thing that we should evaluate all these plans in terms of, and that's the Halloween factor. I think it's really very smart. Would we want to take our kids trick-or-treating there? So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So next is Martha Friedman and then Anita Garoniak.
I'm having trouble. Oh, okay.
We can hear you, so go ahead.
Good. I live on Jefferson Road, also adjacent to the lot that's being developed. I first want to reinforce what Ron Berlin said about the transition. That's been discussed at several of our meetings, and I think it's important to remember the transition between Jefferson and Witherspoon. More specifically, on Joel Schwartz's project, and several of the others, I really like the idea of the townhouses along Franklin. I think that really keeps in scale to the neighborhood and will allow for more plantings as the time goes on. I would like to see townhouses the whole length of Franklin, as you would see along Jefferson and Moore Street. I don't really like the big breaks that have been made for open space because I don't know that people are really going to use them as open space. There is open space, a small park that's been built by Avalon. People don't use that very much, and that is available for people. I think it would be much more keeping in the neighborhood to have consistent townhouses all the way the length of the street. And if there is a less open space, that allows for the buildings to be a lower height. And I think that's important. To have a 4 or 5 story building is definitely out of character. Even if you can't see it from the street, it's still there and it's bulky, and it can be seen from Jefferson, and the tall buildings will overshadow the lower buildings. I feel that it's way too contemporary for the neighborhood. I think it's really important to keep in mind the scale of the townhouses that are with Avalon also. And the idea of putting brick walls along the street, I think, is really pulls people away from feeling that their homes are part of the neighborhood, and also that the pedestrians are part of the neighborhood. It's a very big walking street, not only for children going back and forth to school, but for people walking back and forth because they're in the neighborhood. And I really think it's important to keep the front yards open.
Great. Thank you very much for those comments.
Okay. I have one more comment about the density. It is
okay.
The unit for 160 would be 50 people per acre. And on Jefferson Road, it's 12 people per acre. So that's a big difference in density. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so next is going to be Anita Garoniak and then Yaina Moore, and we'll have Yaina Moore be the last comment as part of this meeting. And I do want to assure everybody, I know there was a lot of ideas that were thrown out today, and sometimes it takes a while to look at them and think about how you feel. So there will be a channel set up for people to continue to send in their comments, which we'll get to at the end of the meeting. But I do want to invite Anita Garoniak to speak now, and then the last final comment will be from Yaina Moore.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me?
I hear you great.
Okay, I'd like to share a photo in a few minutes, if that's possible.
Yeah, but why don't we have Mark work on getting that set up and go ahead and make your comment.
So I want to talk, this is very personal to me. I live on the corner of Franklin and Harris. I know this neighborhood very well. I've been living here for a long time. I know early on someone commented to creating a neighborhood where we're all waving and talking to each other, but we have that neighborhood now. We do. We're in and out of each other's houses. We talk to people who are walking by who, this is a dog walking central here. This is jogger central. The school kids are going in both directions, either over to community or over to the high school. Joel Schwartz's presentation, he talked about making Franklin Avenue more like Jefferson. And that is not really possible, because when these houses were built, at least on the very corner up to of Harris and Franklin, it was before there was any zoning or planning. So we are built very close to the property line. My illustration of this is that I needed to get a variance to put an air conditioning unit up against my house. So, and if I could share, I have a photo to illustrate how close this is. So I don't have, because it's a duplex, and I know we've been talking about single family homes, but in a duplex, you only have the windows that are on the side of your house. There are no interior rooms to escape whatever is across the street from you. And we are built very close to the sidewalk. I can have a conversation with people walking by from sitting in my living room. So I think my point is I think setbacks need to be considered here, because we are not at the end of an expansive lawn. Every window in our houses, and this is number 1 and number 2, looks out on that lot and is very close to that lot. Mr. Hillier had a park at the end of Franklin there as it comes up to Jefferson. I thought that was a good idea. It only goes to one side of Harris. There's another house across the street that is also built very close to the road. I have concerns, I think, as everyone does, about underground parking because of the water table here, which is very high. We are downhill from Franklin, so all the water is running down to the Guyot stream, which is at the end of our street. There are concerns. I know there was issues when the parking lot that was built on Spring Street moved water around under there, and there was issues on Van Devender. So we just want to make sure that that is taken into account.
Yeah, so there's a technical issue where we have to sort of take you off and then bring you back on in a different way if you want to share a picture. So while we're doing that, I'm going to have Yaina go ahead with the last comment, and then we can end it with the picture you want to show. And I'm asking everybody if they get to stay a few minutes extra just to hear the immediate next steps we're going to take after this. So it looks like we're going to go a few minutes over, but I did want to give Yaina Moore a chance to speak, and then we'll wrap it up. So go ahead, Yaina. You unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Yes, it just came up. Thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'd like to thank all of the presenters. It was a really exercised time slot, even though it's condensed, to consider a lot of different ideas. I do want to thank also particularly the mayor and Marina and Heidi, who Mr. Bunton had not recognized, having recognized only the men, as architects who also presented. I want to say particularly with regard to Marina's approach and asking questions and not sort of being totally fixed on a design idea until concepts of guidelines have really been considered, which Anton came at the end and began expounding upon. But she actually went into depth on a couple of things that I'd like to just point out. I mean, it was really important that she asked what type of development should it be? I mean, is it going to be separate, or is it integrated into the neighborhood surrounding it? I mean, I think that has been a question of the surrounding neighborhoods, and housing as a development. This particular assemblage of lots in the town of Princeton should perhaps be considered as really an assemblage of buildings of various unit types, as a few presenters did suggest. I think she also asked the question about whether it should be 140 or 160. Actually, I think the bonus is for 45% in terms of the low-income housing tax credit market, which would change the numbers slightly in terms of assuming it would be 160 total. But since 80 is the mandated COA-born type of housing as affordable housing, we're sort of locked into that. So it does present a larger number. If low-income housing tax credits were the sole basis for moving forward financially, I think just the way we've had sort of an in-depth analysis of design potential for the site, we should have the same kind of scrutiny on the project in terms of its financials. The town is lending or giving the land, and that in itself is a subsidy. And we as citizens should be provided the full financial information as to what this project puts forth. The corporate objectives of the Housing Authority, I am very concerned about, because as in other affordable housing objectives that come down from the state, it rarely recognizes the net effect to affordable housing. While the Housing Authority already has units, the state requires 80 units. There's really no net gain for the Housing Authority other than the cash flows that are coming from this development, which should and help the other developments, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee those 20 units in terms of the type of housing it provides at the costs that are subsidized by the Housing Authority today. Mixed income's not new, it's over 40 years old. HUD began promoting it when mortgages came due from the earlier urban renewal and programs of major housing developments. I was the field rep and architect for one of the largest ones in the country, Columbia Point, when it went mixed income, 1,200 units overlooking the waters, looking at the JFK Library in Boston, and as well as the development of Tent City in downtown. I was the development officer and overseeing its development. So the numbers, I'm familiar with the design and the numbers of these types of projects. And I think we should, as a town, have that provided to us. One of the things about—
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that you start summing it up, because I want to make sure we're able to close out the meeting soon.
Yeah, I'm almost finished. The other thing about mixed, however, is that we should look at mixed tenure. That meaning whether they're all of the units are rental versus some rental and some ownership. And some of the different type structures are really should be looked at in terms of how there can be affordability as well as ownership opportunities on all levels of the housing. It's interesting that we had an Avalon resident participant, that development being 100% rental, and what you do, because it's only one and you really have participation from them, but we want to be able to talk to all of our neighbors, and it's not an enclosed environment. One thing, this is just the last thing I wanted to say, that Marina did bring up, and that is to look at the Housing Authority's assets a little more broadly, and that the Pinnell Center, unfortunately being two-story structure, and the types of uses that are attempted in that building might be better suited to come over to the corner of Franklin and Witherspoon and serve all of their tenants, and create another opportunity at the Witherspoon corner. And that you look more than just singularly at a development to solve your financial problems, but to look at the entire portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Okay, so I know, I'm not sure if Anita's still around. I'm gonna just ask Anita that you're, I know I said you could show your picture. I think it'd just be easier if you could send that in, and we'll include that in the materials from this meeting, because I do want to I know it's a beautiful day on a Saturday, and I want to just close it up here. So first of all, I want to thank the presenters. I want to thank everybody for their engagement afterwards and for some really useful comments that we're going to take back. And again, if you have further thoughts or more that you want to say, we want to give people the opportunity to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Council President David Cohen, who's a member of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and I've asked him to walk everybody briefly just through the immediate next steps for this project.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to add one thanks to a group that also is going to be involved going forward, and that's people who have volunteered to serve on the task force that's going to be working on these design guidelines. The next step is going to be the designation of the task force, which is going to consist of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, some members of staff, representatives from the Housing Authority and from Community Investment Solutions, but also members of the public. And we've received, I think, about 7 or 8 applications at this point. People should be hearing by the end of next week whether or not they've been selected to be on the task force. As the mayor said at the beginning of the meeting, that task force will be officially formed at our council meeting on October 12th.
David, I just wanted to interrupt and say we've actually received, I think, double that, possibly more, and we haven't closed the window on applications. So if people were interested and their curiosity was sparked by what we saw today, by all means, feel free to send in an application if the window is still open.
And it's, I don't know if David, you mentioned this, it's princetonnj.gov. And if you go to boards and commissions, there's a link there for the application.
Okay.
I actually think we have about 20 applications at this point. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
At some point I stopped being copied on them. I wonder why that happened. Anyway, the task force will be meeting several times over the course of October to discuss the input that was received at this meeting and other recommendations from a consultant planner who will be working with the task force to try and come up with a draft set of guidelines that will not be dissimilar to what Tony presented today, but may have additional categories of guidelines. It may eliminate some of the guidelines that were recommended in his set. So the draft guidelines will be presented at another public meeting like this one, probably in early November. We will be looking to receive additional feedback at that time from any interested members of the public. And then there will be a sort of a final meeting of the task force to take that feedback and generate a final set of guidelines. Those will be distributed along with the request for proposals it's going to go out for design professionals who would actually be hired to work on this project. And we expect those RFPs to go out in November and the selection process to hopefully happen before the holidays, although if it stretches a little bit further, that's possible. And I think that that's as much as I can really detail at this point in time. There will be subsequent steps that will be part of the formal site plan approval process. But there are some details that are being worked out in terms of whether that's going to happen under the redevelopment statute or conventional land use planning. So.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to add too that we're working on to put up on the website some sort of more detailed information about this project so people can follow along, and certainly the presentation today and the feedback we heard will be prominent on that page. I do want to mention for anybody who made a comment that was had some sort of pre-written component to it, if you would like that to be part of the minutes, please send it to clerk's office at princetonnj.gov. So that's if you want the full extent of your comments to be word for word in the minutes from this meeting. And with that, Ms. Niedergang?
Mayor, were you going to announce an email address where people could send in additional comments if they need to digest a little bit, or would that just be?
We don't have that yet. I think what we're going to do is like for people to just collect them. I mean, I apologize for scrambling a little bit on this. We'll make an announcement for sure at the next council meeting, how people can submit those. In the meantime, we'll work on getting this material up on the website. And when we do that, we might be able to also put the email contact up on the website. But at this moment, we don't have it ready. So just
thank you.
Digest the material and think what your comment is, and there'll be a vehicle for people to get it to us. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And I want to thank council too. We didn't have a whole lot of time for council discussion on this. I think this was more of a listening meeting, which is really important. So it's really important for all of us to get outside and get some sunlight. So I want to thank everybody. First, yes. All right. Meeting adjourned by motion made by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. And again, thank you everybody very much for this very productive meeting today.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you all.
Here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.